The boy woke up after being slapped on the head. His father, the Marquis, looked at him in disappointment, saying he was the shame of the family. But what they didn't know was that Yurin could master every martial art in the world. The problem was that right now he was just a fat, ugly boy with no power. In the Kingdom of Crisis on the northern border, an army advances. Its Duke, Elian, is stunned, shouting that it's unbelievable. Zombies rise and walk towards them. Elian remarks that their numbers exceed his imagination, and there's the nightmare poison mist. A soldier tells the Duke to look up, and he is startled. There's even an undead knight, Durian. Not even one of the 10 high-level knights among the living could guarantee a victory against him. He says that with their current strength, they can't win and should retreat to hold for a moment. Elian replies that they can't, as the wall is already damaged. If the gate falls, their kingdom is finished. No matter the sacrifice, they must hold them back today. But something flashes past his side. A young man on horseback, his crimson cape flowing, takes over the battlefield. Elian asks who is advancing so recklessly, and the soldier recognizes him. Their reinforcement from the southern Marquis of Rocks, Yurin Rocks, the one who fights with daggers. The soldier tries to say his opponent is Durian. A mere dagger could never cause damage until the weapon is driven into the zombie's eye, sinking deep and severing the undead's head from its body. Elian is shocked, and the knight wonders if Durian was merging. He wonders how it's possible as Yurin throws his daggers. Each one hits a zombie and begins to dissolve their monstrous forms, melting them all with a single strike, making people wonder if he's a saint sent from the heavens. Yurin thinks they shouldn't be ridiculous. It was simply anything good for the body he would take for himself. 6 months earlier, the young man wakes up suddenly. He wonders where he is as a maid approaches the young master. Yurin lifts his head and says she's a beauty, but her clothes are strange and she's carrying a sword. The woman asks how the young master is feeling. She says she'll call the priest this time. Yurin extends his hand, getting the woman's attention. He says he just wants to ask something, but the girl has already left. He gets out of bed, wondering where on earth he is. Then he looks to the side and sees his fat figure in a mirror. He wonders where his young handsome form went and why he turned into a fat kid. Unable to believe it, the young man tries to convince himself it's all a dream, and if he goes back to sleep, maybe he'll wake up. The priest approaches and says the young master has finally awakened. Then a man appears in the room and calls him a bastard. The disgrace who tarnished his family's name has finally woken up. The priest tells his lord that he has just woken up and the punishment can wait. The man grumbles a bit, and the priest says that for someone beaten unconscious, he isn't too badly hurt. His mind is stable and most of the wounds have healed, which is a relief. However, the Lord shouts that he would have preferred it if he had lost his life because he was harassing his fiancée. He was a beast. He's 19 years old and it's time to grow up. Even his younger brother has awakened his aura. But the older brother is still fat and without a shred of energy. Yurin repeats this, completely shocked. The Lord turns, warning that when he recovers, he must go to her and beg for forgiveness. Yurin repeats her and his father replies that it's his wife Ilya, and if she doesn't forgive him, he will be truly punished. He asks if he understands and the protagonist accepts. The Lord warns that in any case, he must stop bringing disgrace to the family name. Yurin trembles in fear, wondering if this is his identity. So he must be Wellington Rocks. The Lord is surprised to be called by his name. He calls him a brat and slaps his face for being so bold as to call his father by his name. The fat boy is beaten for several seconds. The priest tries to calm his lord, but without success. Yurin thinks it can't be real. This must be a dream. He regains consciousness after a while and sits up, startled. He wonders why he hasn't woken up in the real world. The woman approaches, asking if he has finally awakened. Yurin calls out for Aaron, and the woman responds, but she's confused when there's no further contact. The protagonist asks if he's stuck here because he messed with Ilya and got knocked out. Aaron confirms, but questions why he's suddenly speaking so politely. Yurin agrees and asks if he was really beaten like that. The woman confirms and says that, to be precise, he tried to harass Miss Ilya and she beat him until he passed out. The protagonist curses his life, leaving the girl confused as he screams that he's screwed because there was no doubt. Somehow, he had been transmigrated into the web novel he wrote, but not as the protagonist. Instead, as the trashy villain who embarrasses the main character and dies a miserable death, he complains that this can't be his fate. Aaron calls for her young master, but he continues freaking out, saying this wasn't a webtoon, a word unknown to the woman. Euron thinks the body he possessed was a good-for-nothing piece of crap. No talent, no skill, no effort. Living only off his family's prestige, he loses his fiancée to the protagonist. He tries to ambush him for revenge but gets beaten up instead, and he loses his life pathetically in a nameless alley. Euron wonders how he'll survive in such an uncertain world, reflecting that it's a fantasy world and he has no idea about the fat boy's abilities. But at least he knows about the fated encounters and items the protagonist hasn't obtained yet. So he decides he'll prepare quickly as he sits up in bed, but he's hindered by the poor center of gravity of his fat body. Eren asks if the young master is okay. Euron replies that he's definitely not, but he notices something different. The girl says he should be resting. The protagonist thinks he couldn't see it just now, but that's why he frowned earlier. A system screen was next to Eren. It said the girl's abilities were Swift Sword, Clear Mind Mirror, and Aura Adaptation. The girl calls for the young master once more. Euron denies it, saying he went crazy for a few seconds but is fine now and she should get back to her duties. Eren accepts and turns to leave while the protagonist watches her. He reflects on the Swift Sword. Originally, Eren was a character much stronger and more talented than normal knights. But he wonders what this affinity thing was, which was at 0. He wonders if it's a dating sim appearing because he's played so many of them. He wants to know what kind of world building this is. The protagonist thinks for a bit. The affinity isn't negative, which is good considering Euron's usual behavior, but that wasn't the important part. He looks at his own body in the mirror, waiting for the system screen to appear. He shouts, yes, and looks at his status screen, which shows the Eye of Creation skill and the 4 heavens of the Tang clan. He thinks he has some special abilities, but among them, the 4 heavens of the Tang clan skill. It was from that wuxia webtoon he loved because the heroine was extremely beautiful. It's the clan that specializes in poisons and hidden weapons. The world building was a mix, but he decides to wait and see. Because if he can learn the martial arts of the 4 heavens of the Tang clan, he'll have a great chance of survival here. This was a martial art from a renowned sect in the 4 Heavens province in wuxia novels known for various poisons and specializing in silent assassination. He wonders why it's here if this is supposed to be a medieval fantasy world, but it means he can unlock his abilities. Wellington walks to his room until Eren calls for her lord. He asks if his son has woken up and the girl confirms. Wellington wants to know how he looks. Eren replies that he didn't seem completely well yet. He fell when he tried to stand up and his overall condition seemed poor. Wellington says that Father Elio told him the wound wasn't deep, but his son seemed a bit strange. Because before, if he had told him to ask Elio for forgiveness, he would have thrown tantrum. But now he strangely just accepted it. His personality hasn't changed. He's just dazed. Tomorrow, he'll probably be furious and seeking revenge on Ilya. Eren says her young master will gradually get better. Wellington turns around irritated, leaving the girl shocked. He says that even he, his own father, has given up on him, but the girl still believes. He should feel bad for the girl and let her live her life as a knight. He wonders how hard it must be to serve under him, but Eren thinks otherwise. Because today, the young master seemed different somehow, and it was hard to explain. Earlier, Eren had yelled asking what he was talking about. He replies that he just wants to exercise a bit and she should show him the way. Eren questions if he's really going to train right now, and Eren confirms asking what the problem is. His creator's eye ability allows him to see stats, but he had no idea how to unlock the martial art of the Tang clan of Sichuan. Maybe it's because of his obesity. For now, he'll just exercise until he finds a way. Eren thinks that this mansion is gigantic, the size of several stadiums, and he's already exhausted. But if he tries to exercise in his room, his fat self will just keep going back to bed. He should definitely skip exercising at home. And also, all the servants he encounters look at him with extreme disgust. But considering what a bastard Euron used to be, he can't blame them for it. They keep walking and Euron asks if they're close yet. Eren replies that they're almost there. This is the 3rd training center, and most of the knights use the 1st and 2nd ones. Euron suddenly notices someone in front of him, seeing that the affinity was 91 with a chance of taking his life. This man was Recap Alien, who calls out to the young master, questioning what brings him to his training hall. Euron recognizes him immediately, and the man laughs, saying it's an honor that the young master still remembers him. Euron agrees and looks at the sword, frightened. Then he suddenly calls for Eren, asking if something had happened between them. Eren asks if he doesn't remember, because a few years ago, When the Marquis forced him to train, the furious young master called Recca an apprentice knight, and he scarred his face with a sword while laughing. After that, the Marquis gave up on making him train. Yurin shouts that there was no way. Recca glances at him from the corner of his eye, thinking he's a hopeless piece of trash. Yurin decides he's going to run away. He asks if there's another training hall, as he'd like to use one by himself. Eren says this is the 4th hall, but it's so far away and the equipment is bad, so it's probably empty. Eren replies that it's perfect and they should go there because if he's going to lose weight, he should do it properly. The bodyguard accepts and tells him to follow. She points out the 4th training hall, and Eren is panting from the walk. He looks down, seeing a table of equipment, while thinking that the Tang clan of Sichuan specializes in throwing knives. So he decides he should probably give it a try, looking at the targets in front of him. Eren aims at one of them and brings the dagger up to his face. He pulls his arm back and throws with all his might, but the dagger just clatters to the ground, failing to hit its target. He complains, thinking he could have unlocked it, but he notices Eren behind him. So he makes an excuse saying he just threw it for fun. He should build some basic stamina first and decides he'll run a few laps around the hall. He's going to train on his own, so Eren can do whatever she wants. Wellington questions this in complete disbelief because Yurin had gone to the training grounds and started working hard. It was strange, and he wondered how long it would last. 3 weeks pass, and the Lord says that for 3 whole weeks he hasn't stopped training. The boy had lost a lot of weight, and his appearance had changed remarkably as expected of his son. Without all that fat, he's actually quite handsome, wondering if he has truly matured. Back at the castle, he thinks he's lost a lot of weight. But the Tang clan of Sichuan technique refused to unlock. He'll try for a month, and if it doesn't work, he'll just steal some of the protagonist's lucky encounters. Eren suddenly arrives saying she brought dinner, and the boy thanks her. It was chirain soup, a nutrient-rich meal excellent for burning fat and building muscle. Yurin complains about the food, and Eren asks if he's tired of it. He confirms as he's been eating nothing else for 3 whole weeks, and the girl calls out to the young master, asking what he really wants, to lose weight or to become a knight. Yurin replies that he'd like to become a knight, and Eren says that in this territory, even the powerful Marquis eats terrain soup after training. So the young master should stop complaining and just eat the soup. Yurin reluctantly accepts her orders. He thinks to himself, you live and you learn, but wonders what kind of old custom this is. Anyway, this soup had helped him lose fat, so he'll just eat it for now. He scoops some onto his spoon and brings it to his mouth. Eren notices something different and wonders what it is. Because today, the chirain soup tasted a little different. The system screen appears before him warning that he has ingested poison. But another notification also pops up in a chain. Because he had satisfied the condition to unlock the Tang clan of Sichuan, the skill has been unlocked, leaving him in complete disbelief. Suddenly, the Marquis hears a knock on his door and says to come in. It's his wife who says she brought some tea. Kana was the second wife, and she asks what he's looking at so intently. Wellington replies that he was just thinking about how beautiful the garden was. Kana says she's been personally taking care of it with great attention, and her husband compliments her admirable skills. But his wife suddenly grabs him from behind, questioning when he will choose Colin as his heir, just as he had mentioned before. Since it's already been decided anyway, it would be good to do it quickly. Wellington resists the hug and calls out to Kana, telling her that it will take a little more time. Kana asks why since he'd said he would name him last month. The Lord confirms but adds that she's probably heard as well. Recently, it seems Eren has finally come to his senses, and he is the eldest son of House Rocks. If he really puts in the effort, he could be a good successor. Kana says that's true and she's heard a lot about it too. She was worried, but at least he seems to have recovered, and that must be a relief for her husband. Wellington says it's funny to think that after being beaten by his fiancée, he actually woke up. But Kana asks what he's going to do about the successor. The Lord replies that Yurin has only been training for 3 weeks and it's better to watch him for a little longer. But he promises that if Yurin returns to his old ways, he will immediately give the title of heir to Colin. Kana says she'll go to her room first and that he should finish his work quickly. Finally leaving the Duke's room, she bites her lip in anger. She calls out Eren's name and tells him to just wait and see. Back in the room, he's amazed to have unlocked the skill. Then he says that the Tang family of Sichuan specializes in poison, and the condition to unlock it was to ingest poison. But stopping to think, he looks at the soup stats again because there was an icon, and he wants to know what's above it. Looking at it made the text scroll down, seeing that it even showed a Hanyang herb used for paralysis. The boy seems excited, and Eren is confused, wondering why the young master isn't eating. Eren replies that he will eat and brings another spoonful to his mouth. As he chews, he thinks for a bit longer, wondering who put the poison in this because normally Eren wouldn't lose his life to poison. Something had changed the flow of the story. And now that he thinks about it, there was something that hadn't happened yet, remembering his father next to Colin, wondering why he hadn't been named the official heir yet. Was it because he started training? In any case, the poison in the food probably came from them. He swallows the little that was left. Suddenly, another system screen appears before him. It notifies him that the conditions for weak paralysis poison have been met. The boy announces he's finished eating. It was so good it brought him to tears, leaving Eren shocked. Eren says he wants to be alone for a while and asks if she can leave. The bodyguard simply accepts, telling him to rest as she will see him tomorrow. Eren agrees and wishes her a good night. When she leaves the room, the boy turns to the mirror saying that now he's going to check on the Tang clan of Sichuan, commanding the creator's eye to appear. The system shows his stats and the synchronization rate, which had dropped to 97. Eren says it's a smart interface, and if he focuses only on the part with the plus icon, he sees that he now has skills in poison, martial arts, and hidden weapons. First, he decides he'll check the poison skill with only the weak paralysis skill unlocked, but he has no internal technique. The protagonist noted there were many poisons, and he had to go down as far as he could. He saw that the final poison was invisibility. This meant he had to unlock the previous ones first. It was a tier system. To get the most basic one of all, weak paralysis, he needed an internal technique. It made sense since the Tang clan of Sichuan used internal energy to store their potions. Now he would check the martial arts. There were 3 options for martial arts: the Black Poison Arts, Thunder Needle, and the Divine Energy of 10,000 Poisons. Eren said it was an easy choice, especially for a wuxia fan. The Black Poison martial arts focuses on poison. The Thunder Needle martial art focuses on hidden equipment, and the Divine Energy of 10,000 Poisons technique takes longer to improve, but it allows him to enhance both his poison and his hidden equipment. Choosing that technique right away, the system sent an energy to him. Eren said it was unbelievable as the technique's mantras were simply engraved in his mind. He had to try circulating his energy right now. Taking off his shirt and sitting on the bed, he gathered energy in his dantian. The young man noticed a strange flow throughout his body. This must be chi. He had to guide it through the meridians and store it in his dantian to build his internal strength. The next day, the young man finished his concentration. He said it was amazing. Those martial arts novels weren't lying about training all night without sleeping. This was real, and he didn't feel tired at all. In fact, his body was full of energy. He could feel a flow of chi around him. He could tell how many birds were outside the window without even looking. He also felt a warm energy in his dantian. And now, if he circulated chi in his head without a mirror, the status window would open. It showed he was at 1 star in the technique. The protagonist felt a familiar aura outside the door. He looked over just as Eren opened it, calling for her young master. She had come to wake him up, but since he looked untouched, he must not have slept. Eren replied that it just happened that way. She responded that it wasn't good and he should rest for today's training. The protagonist refused, saying he was already on his way. He felt incredible and was in great condition, so he had to train. Eren agreed and said she would prepare breakfast first. Leaving the room, she wondered when the young master had started to gain muscle. Outside at the training ground, Eren approached the daggers that were on the table. He said it was true as he picked one up. He prepared to throw it until he noticed something different. Right before his eyes, there was a crosshair, just like in first-person shooter games, so he would aim precisely at the target. Moving his body quickly while Eren watched with concern, Eren threw the weapon, pierced the target, releasing a purple aura. He said he really did it, and his guard was impressed. The protagonist also unleashed the hidden weapons from the system. Eren called out to the young master, questioning what he had just done. The protagonist answered that he didn't know either, guessing that the results of last month's training were starting to show. She replied, "No way," completely shocked. Eren reflected that this was the first time he had seen her like this and wondered if he should try again. He held the dagger once more. He thought that when he threw it, something felt like his internal energy was surging from his dantian. And that was good because this time he would throw it faster and stronger. Throwing it once more against the target, he embedded the dagger in its center. The target even broke. Eren was completely astonished by this, and the protagonist kept a smile on his face. He thought that having a crosshair like in a game was basically using a hack. Believe it or not, there used to be a first-person shooter game called Battle Attack, and he had won the tournament at the local LAN center. Eren questioned what on earth that was. The protagonist asked if she felt anything different about him, and the guard repeated his question. She said yes, and besides the fact that he had lost more weight than yesterday, she couldn't really tell. The protagonist questioned her about losing weight. Eren confirmed it. He was training every day and drinking chirene soup, but today he had changed more noticeably. The protagonist was confused and wondered if she couldn't feel the internal energy flowing in his body. This meant that in this world, only he could use internal energy and no one could detect it. He had gained an incredible power. He laughed as he wondered if he should keep practicing. He hit the target twice in a row with extreme ease. He said that this time he would try something different. He embedded one dagger into the handle of another that was already in the target. He said it was perfect, leaving his guard astonished once again. She asked if she could try once. Holding the dagger, she aimed calmly. The girl threw it with all her strength, but it didn't even reach the target, hitting the side instead. Eren said there was something she wasn't able to do, and the girl got frustrated. Then the young man suddenly noticed something. A status window had appeared above her head. She had unlocked the direct cut skill. The protagonist repeated the part about it being executable with any weapon. He said he would test it while Eren got irritated that it wasn't working. He wondered if he should try it with this. He told Eren to step aside for a moment. She questioned what was in his hand since he was holding a broken wooden sword. The protagonist raised it to its highest point, feeling a great deal of internal energy flowing from his dantian to his arms. Then he threw it, executing the direct cut. That broken sword embedded itself in the middle of the target, shattering everything around it. Eren was impressed and asked what in the world that was. She wanted to know what kind of power the young master had. Euron replied that he wasn't sure. Maybe it was just practice. His bodyguard replied that was impossible. The protagonist said he knew she reported his training to his father, so he had a favor to ask. He wanted her to keep this matter a secret for a while. Eren questioned this, and Euron explained that he was testing many things right now and would explain it himself later, so she should wait. She simply accepted, and so the day passed. The household staff said their goodbyes, wishing them a good day and saying they would see them tomorrow. The same routine happened with a man named Peru, simply accepted. He walked calmly by and then changed direction. Euron watched this with a cold expression. He decided to use the creator's eye on him. This was Peru with an affinity of 0 and the powers of poisonous touch and agile movement. Euron realized this ability allowed him to put poison in his food. It was definitely this guy, so he would finally conduct the real test. The arrow floating in his hand would go straight for this man. Whispering the invocation for the paralytic poison, his aura descended to his 2 index fingers. Peru suddenly felt something strange in his body. He turned around, suffering and screaming that his body couldn't move. The protagonist approached the fainted man, saying the test was a success. He could see the total duration was 1 hour. He would move this man first, picking him up on his back. As night fell elsewhere, Peru was in pain. The protagonist told him to snap out of it. He wanted to know if he had come to his senses and if he knew who he was. Peru trembled with fear. The protagonist said that if he wanted to live, he should answer correctly. He asked if he was the one who put poison in his soup. He had a few questions for this man. Peru should blink once for yes and twice for no. He asked if he understood, and Peru blinked once. The protagonist decided to ask again, wanting to know if he was the one who poisoned his soup. Peru looked at him coldly and just blinked once. Euron asked if the poison he gave him was the Hanyang herb. Peru was startled and blinked once more. Moving on to the next question, the protagonist said that the one who ordered him to do the poisoning was Marcianiscana. Euron was surprised by the answer as Peru had denied it. He told that bastard not to lie. He said he could tell everything. And if he lied, his neck would get a dagger mark. Now he would ask again, wanting to know if the one who gave the order was Miss Kana. Peru became even more frightened and denied it again. The protagonist thought he didn't seem to be lying and wanted to know who it was, but he would put on an act for a while. He told him to eat this and swallow it. It was called the initial poison. The man swallowed, and the protagonist said that from this moment on, he had exactly 1 month left to live. If he didn't take the antidote he had by the end of the month, all the organs in his body would melt. For now, it was better to follow his orders. He asked if he understood, and Peru agreed. Now the protagonist touched his head, trying to release the paralysis poison. And just like that, the man was no longer restrained. The protagonist told him he could move and speak now, and Peru accepted. Irin said he would ask one more time. He wanted to know who had ordered him to poison him. Peru trembled slightly in fear, saying it was the Knight Commander, Carrick's Livington. He had ordered the young master to die like a soldier before the year was over. The protagonist thought that he was Kana's older brother, appointed commander because of his connections, but that wasn't important. He handed a paper to his new subordinate. Peru questioned if all of those weren't poisons, and the protagonist thought that few people have as much knowledge as this guy. Then he told him that someone like him should be able to get them on the black market and should take Carrick's money. He must bring all the poisons, starting with the one he already has by tomorrow night. Peru questioned why he needed all these poisons. Irin replied, wanting to know when he had given him permission to ask questions. The subordinate just understood fearfully. Irin turned around, saying they should go. And besides, from today on, all his medicinal soups should have a lot of Hanyang grass. Peru questioned this, completely shocked. Back in his room, the protagonist said that this was incredible and martial arts are truly strong beyond measure. And he even fell for his initial poison where he just mixed a few leaves together and the man believed it. But anyway, for now, he needs to master the Tang's 4 heavens martial arts quickly. If things go differently from the path he wrote, terrible events would happen around the world. After a full day passed, Peru called for the young master, informing him that he had brought all the poisonous herbs he had on hand. He left some ginseng and leaves on the table. The protagonist said this was Hanyang grass, the reverse green creeper, and the other was a croink leaf. Peru was surprised, asking how he knew since they were all rare toxic herbs. Irin replied that it was very basic and reflected that he could see all this with the status window. But he changed the subject, asking why he had the other poisons if the Hanyang grass would be enough to take his life. Peru responded that Hanyang grass takes a long time, and if a resistance develops, anyone can withstand it. If mixed with the green creeper, the effects grow stronger. The protagonist summarized that if the poisons were combined, they grew stronger and became harder to detect. He wanted to know where he had learned about poisons. Peru said that when he was 8 years old, he was sold to the Livington family and learned from a poison master. There were about 20 children, but they all lost their lives and only he survived. Irin thought that without an affinity for poison, children wouldn't survive long, and he didn't seem grateful to the family. So he had gained a useful person. He said that he did well, and that was all for today. Peru thanked the young master and wished him a peaceful night. The protagonist was left alone in the room and thought it was time to start. With these poisonous herbs here, he was going to eat them all. He brought one to his mouth. The protagonist felt like he was going to vomit from the taste. His system notified him that all poisons had been ingested and there was great danger, so he must meditate and level up to level 2. The protagonist took a deep breath, trying to concentrate with all his might. After another day, Irin knocked on his door, telling her lord that it was morning. She noticed the young master was already up and was surprised as he was sitting on the bed meditating. She questioned what on earth had happened to his body. The protagonist reached 2 stars and acquired the draconic treasure martial art and 3 more poisons. He then woke up with a smile on his face. She wanted to know what in the world had happened to the young master, but she smelled a strange odor and complained about it. The protagonist just accepted it and scratched his head. He reflected that it's true that when internal energy and martial arts advance a level, a lot of impurities are expelled from the body. Then he walked over saying it stank a little and he should open the window. Irin told him not to and to go straight to the bath. Later in the day, she led the young master. Irin laughed, seeing that he was learning the movements of the Draconic Steps martial art, a movement technique optimized for assassination and evasion used by the Tang family. He couldn't believe he was learning something that only appears in novels. He thought about just imitating the movements for now. Irin called for the young master and turned around. She wanted to know why he was suddenly walking like a drunk and what was wrong with his body. The protagonist replied that he was fine and she shouldn't worry. He laughed as he walked from side to side. Irin questioned if he was really okay. He was going to training hall 1 today and there were many nights there. The protagonist confirmed he would definitely be fine. He was just curious about how the other knights trained and she didn't need to worry about him. Irin told him they were almost there. The knights trained hard, swinging their swords up and down and from side to side. One knight was surprised and questioned who that person was. That woman was the eldest young master's servant, but they wanted to know who the handsome young man behind her was. People were astonished when they remembered the young master had lost a ton of weight from training. They wondered what kind of magic he used to stop being a useless pig. The protagonist thought that it didn't matter if these guys whispered quietly. His internal energy allowed him to hear everything. Eren pointed to a guy in the hall focused on training. He seemed to be an apprentice knight, but his posture was excellent, and he would probably become a novice soon. These moves were basic forms of rock swordsmanship, so the young master should watch closely as Euron noticed that guy. He was Clyde, a key character in the novel who becomes the protagonist's ally. He had never written about his past before he was found. Clyde swung his sword up and down, and Euron thought it was interesting he was in a place like this. A good opportunity would come later. Anyway, today, these knights who had a negative affinity with him would become his test subjects. First, he would test the chain poison, choosing a purple-haired knight as his target. He decided to activate the chain poison, and the knight felt a sudden pain. He fell to his knees as other people ran toward him. They wanted to know what was wrong and if he needed to go to the bathroom, but the man denied it. He was salivating as he tried to endure the pain. He fell to the ground, and the knights shouted that they needed to call the priest. But suddenly, the man's pain disappeared, and his captain questioned what was wrong. The pain was gone, and the captain asked if this bastard was playing a joke and told him to go to the bathroom. The knight tried to argue that he really was in pain. Euron said that was good. This time, he would activate the soul-dismantling mist, which causes fear and confusion in a target within a certain range. Suddenly, a knight heard a loud bang. The man in front of him had turned into a terrifying demon. Eren noticed the men on the floor, screaming for the demon to go away. She questioned why they were like this. In his nightmare, the man faced a demon and a skeleton trying to take his life. He cursed it, but suddenly everything vanished. They asked what that was all of a sudden. Euron thought that he couldn't let them lose their lives, and that was enough testing for today because it was impressive. He then announced he was going back for the day. Eren questioned if he was leaving so soon, and the protagonist replied that it was noisy there and he would go to Hall 4 as planned. On the way, they met a girl. She said a guest had arrived for the young master. Miss Ilya Marcus had come to see him. That woman at the window said that this time she would really break Euron's resistance. She turned to the protagonist who just said her name. The girl suddenly blushed, and Euron asked if she had arrived. Ilya didn't recognize him and asked who he was. Before, when the maid called and said Ilya Marcus was waiting, the protagonist thought his feisty fiancée had come to visit. This was probably the time she demanded to break off the engagement, but Euron kept refusing and telling her not to be ridiculous. The young man said the situation couldn't be helped. Back in the room, the protagonist answers that it was him, Euron. The girl is surprised, and he says it's been a while. Ilya says she heard a rumor that he'd lost weight from training, but she thought it was obviously fake. After all, it hadn't even been 2 months, yet he'd changed so much. The protagonist says it was because he worked hard, leaving Ilya confused. After being beaten by her, Euron thought for a long time, and then he decided to change his life. Ilya asks if he wants to fight for revenge, but the young man denies it, kneeling because he's grateful to her. He was able to come to his senses and is truly sorry for what happened. If she wants to break off the engagement because of it, he would accept. She just asks who he is as she doesn't recognize him. Euron says he was the former trash of the Rock's family. Again, he says he's sorry for everything he's done. Ilya is surprised by this. The protagonist thinks that, to be honest, it wasn't his fault but the original owner of this bodies. The reason he was asking for forgiveness was specific. Ilya wasn't just a simple heroine. She had the Sword Queen ability, which only improves her swordsmanship. Later, she saves the fallen protagonist and even cuts down the final villain, all thanks to her ability. That's why even if they broke the engagement, it would be beneficial to restore their relationship and make her his ally. But Ilya tells him to stand up, asking if he's serious about this. Euron says yes and promises, but the girl refuses, telling him to swear on it while emanating a terrifying aura. The protagonist thinks it's a suffocating pressure and that he's seen this scene somewhere before. Ilya says he doesn't want to live like before, and if he breaks the agreement, she'll beat him to death. The protagonist is confused because the original Ilya said this to the protagonist. Either way, he can't breathe and mutters about the myriad poison of the electric divine art. Ilya is surprised as the protagonist stands up. She questions how he resisted her aura, but the protagonist accepts and swears it with a sweet smile on his face. Ilya gets embarrassed and turns to leave, saying she'll be keeping an eye on him. If he messes up one more time, they'll break the engagement. No matter the reason, the protagonist is surprised they haven't broken up yet. At the Lord's castle, Wellington asks if she found urine, and the girl confirms it. He asks if she's made her decision. Ilya confirms it once more and says the engagement would not be broken either way. Wellington asks for the reason. Ilya explains that her father always said people can't change, but there was a rumor that he had, and she was curious. She was wondering if he had returned to being the weak but gentle urine from her childhood. Instead, he became a completely different person, and that was the reason she wanted to believe in him one more time. Wellington asks if that's all, and the girl affirms it. But if he goes back to being trash, she would beat him to death with her own hands. Wellington says that's to be expected of a great warrior and that she should take care of urine. Ilya decides to go on her way, and the Lord asks her to stay for a few more days. The girl explains that she told her father she was going to break off the engagement, so it was a bit awkward. Wellington asks if she's going to see urine before she leaves, but Ilya says no because he's training and she doesn't want to interrupt. The day passes and Urine asks why his father had called for him. He denies it, wanting to know who he was, and the protagonist doesn't understand the question. Wellington laughs, saying it was a joke and that he had really worked hard, but he wants to know if he knows the reason he was summoned. Urine asks if it's about the start of his night training. Wellington says he's right and that he has become sharp as well. Now he will learn the Rock's family's swordsmanship, and the protagonist calls out to the Marquis, saying he has something new to tell him. His father asks about the throwing arts as he wants to learn that instead of swordsmanship. The protagonist confirms it, and Wellington replies that it's unacceptable and that this vulgar skill is used by bandits. With that technique, he wouldn't even get close to earning knight's armor or defeating a low-level monster like a Barak. Irin says they should make a bet then about whether or not he can hunt a Barak with a dagger, and if he was so confident they should bet. His father sighs, saying he's being needlessly stubborn. A warrior's blade needs aura to destroy a Barak's scales. So unless he had practiced throwing for 100 years, he would never be able to pierce them. The protagonist says in that case, he must be sure of his victory, so he should make a bet with him. His father calls him reckless and says he'll take this chance to completely crush his stubbornness. He asks for the conditions of victory. Euron replies that if he defeats a Barak with his dagger, he'll take care of his own training. And if he fails, he'll do whatever his father commands. As the day goes by, the protagonist thinks it's good that Eren didn't report his training, and that the real test is tomorrow. He wonders how many tries it will take to pierce a Barak's scales. Just in case, he'll eat some poisonous herbs tonight and raise his divine body of myriad poisons to 3 stars. He turns around when he hears a noise. Eren calls for the young master and says she's delivering a message from the Marquis. Tomorrow at 12 o'clock, the place would be the first training center. He asks if even she knew about the bet, and Eren replies that not only her, but the entire state was already aware. Thanks to that, the whole place was bursting with laughter right now. They were all talking about how the young master would wet his pants in fear or run away when he saw a Barak, and they were having a good time talking about it. After all, the young master is still public enemy number 1. Yoren says that in that case, all these people would be watching tomorrow, and Eren confirms it. The Marquis wouldn't stop there, and the training center will be completely packed, the young man mutters, complaining that it's the price of fame. But he wants to know what Eren thinks will happen. The girl says it will probably be the young master's day to shine. His divine body of myriad poisons technique reaches 3 stars, and the great time for the test arrives. People celebrate while shouting for or against the young master. Euron says it's truly embarrassing. His father starts the event, asking if his son is ready. The young man confirms, but says there's a large audience. Wellington says he only told his mage, but somehow the news spread to everyone. He should try not to be embarrassed by it. The mage announces he will begin and uses his short-range summoning magic. Euron thinks he's finally going to see magic with his own eyes. A bolt of lightning suddenly strikes the battlefield with a creature taking shape amidst the smoke. The protagonist thinks there's something even more incredible than that, seeing a monster he created as an author right in front of him, Borak, a sea monster about 5 feet tall. The people think they shouldn't look at it and that it's scary. The protagonist is impressed as this is what it looked like. This monster, the Borak, was something that came to his mind while eating purple fish sashimi. He was full of ideas for monsters. If it weren't for the legs and arms, it would even be a little cute. The monster charges at the young man. Irin just notices the attack and dodges, getting behind the creature. The people are impressed, and the Lord says it's not over yet. Borak turns around, confused. The protagonist thinks he just moved forward without even thinking, but it wasn't as fast as he imagined. First, he'll see how hard its scales are drawing a dagger. Then he notices something different. There was something like a target marking one of the creature's weak spots. The protagonist decides to try it and swings his arm to throw the dagger. His ki flows into the blade, and it hits the creature's weak spot. The Boarak suddenly feels extreme pain, falling to the ground lifeless, preventing any kind of entertainment for the audience. The protagonist complains, thinking it went down in just one hit. The people are impressed, and even Wellington is completely shocked. Everyone shouts for the young master, saying he really did it. The young master had defeated the Boarak, and it was so cool. They applaud him until a voice calls Yorin a brat, asking how in the world he did that. The protagonist says he aimed carefully and hit the right spot. His father complains that he can't accept it. A Boarak had lost its life to a simple dagger. That was impossible. The protagonist questions if the great Marquis Rocks would go back on his word. His mage calls the Marquis, saying that under the Borak's arm was a scaleless spot, and the young master hit it right there. Wellington complains that it was pure luck, but the protagonist says a bet is still a bet. His father asks to go just one more round. He'll add another promise instead. If he wins this time, no matter what he asks, he will be granted one wish. But if he loses, he must go back and learn swordsmanship as they agreed, which excites the protagonist. His father says that this time his opponent will be a knight, not a Boarak. He asks if he'll accept the challenge now. The protagonist says yes. It didn't matter to him. He thinks that, on the contrary, this was his chance. He was going to deal with the commander of the knights, Karox. He wonders if this could be the opportunity to break the guy's arrogance. But he still wants to keep Peru's poison and decides he should let him go for now. Wellington says that a fully trained knight would surely be too much for him to handle. So he would put an apprentice in his place, making it fair enough. The protagonist thinks about it. He wonders if he could choose the knight. He chooses Clyde as his opponent. The man walks toward the arena with his sword on his back. He says the Marquis has summoned him, and Wellington notes that he seems very confident. He was going to give Clyde a task. The apprentice accepts, saying he will follow any command from his lord. He tells him to straighten that kid out, and Clyde turns around. The young master just nods at him, leaving the swordsmanship apprentice completely confused. Wellington asks what's wrong, and if he wasn't confident, he could do it. Clyde denies it and says he'll do as ordered. The protagonist tells him not to worry too much. He's just going to throw 3 daggers, and if Clyde blocks all 3, he can consider it a victory. Wellington questions if he sees the brat's arrogance and says Clyde must teach him a real lesson this time. Clyde readies his sword, and the protagonist circles the arena. The knights say that if he loses, there's no dinner for him tonight, and he'll have to run 100 laps around the training field. A person in the audience with a female voice says that the young master can do it. He thinks that whoever it is, they were rooting for him. Clyde calls out to the young master. He announces he's ready, and Yorin turns around as well. He prepares his first dagger, thinking he'll start by turning out the lights. But he notices something strange. Compared to the fight with the Boarak, his opponent had many more openings. If he hits one of them, he could take his life. He won't let that happen throwing his first dagger. He was just going to go straight for it. Clyde says it's a good one and tries to defend with his sword. He is forced back about 4 steps because of it. The crowd wonders what that sound was, as it sounded like a cannon blast. Wellington tells him to wait and notices the dagger falling to the ground. He picks it up, wondering how so much power could come from a common dagger. Clyde trembles in fear. His sword pierced through. The protagonist asks if he's warmed up now, as he can see what happens if he lets his guard down. He tells him to get ready, because this time he was going to throw with everything he's got. He emanates a pressure that makes the aspiring knight tremble. The protagonist thinks that he is still a main character after all. He won't lose like this. Yorin decides it's time, preparing his dagger for a direct throw. That thunderous blast happens once more and approaches the knight. Clyde tries to counterattack with his long sword, but a collision with an immense noise takes over the arena. As the smoke begins to clear, the people are astonished. The Marquis can't believe the result, as Clyde has fallen to his knees. He trembles with fear now, his sword broken in 2 pieces. He lets it go, leaving Marquis Wellington speechless. He calls out to Yorin, telling him they should talk, just the 2 of them. The protagonist says the match isn't over yet. There was still one dagger left and the Marquis questions it. He says that was enough, but Euron decides he will ask him directly. He calls for Clyde to raise his head. He calls out to his young master. The protagonist asks if he's going to end the battle like this, and if someone who wants to become a knight would accept such humiliation, victory, or defeat. A knight must swing his sword until a clear end. That was the way of a knight. He then shouts that he will ask Clyde one more time if he's going to give up like this. The knight murmurs a little, calling for the young master, but then he orders them to bring him a new sword. He gets up emanating an energy as he says he won't back down like this. The knights are stunned, and the Marquis asks how a rookie was awakening his aura like that. Euron thinks that, as expected, at this opening point, Clyde's berserker skill manifested. Now he can test higher-level techniques. The opponents stare each other down for a few seconds. Clyde calls out to the young master telling him to throw his dagger. Wellington denies the situation in his thoughts. For so much aura to manifest, it was a talent on the level of a high-ranking knight. He wonders what Euron will do, and the protagonist simply replies that it's good. He takes his last dagger and puts all his strength into it. He throws it awkwardly toward the man. Clyde wonders what that was and why it was so slow this time. He yells that Euron is just messing with him. He then tries to cut the dagger down, but it just swerves around his sword. He's confused, and Wellington realizes what's happening. The dagger embeds itself in Clyde's shoulder. It nearly pierces his bones, causing the knight agonizing pain. He falls to the ground, groaning in pain. The crowd wonders what that was, saying it was too slow. They say Clyde should stop exaggerating and ask if he's going easy on him just because he's the young master. The protagonist thinks not. There must be more internal energy embedded this time, causing excruciating pain. His father calls to Euron, telling him they'll talk later. He won the bet today. The protagonist flashes a smile. Clyde suffers from the pain in his shoulder, but the protagonist touches him, telling him to wait a moment and use his energy absorption. Clyde realizes the pain is fading. He thanks the young master, and Euron says it was nothing. The knight asks for his forgiveness. He explains that when the dagger came flying slowly, he thought the young master was underestimating him, but that wasn't it. It was a precise technique. Not even a master could have such a technique in so little time, so he must have been hiding his true strength. He asks if there's a secret faction targeting the Marquis's family, and if that's why he was hiding his strength until now. He says it's no wonder it seems strange that only the young master was left behind. It was a noble sacrifice. Euron thinks this guy always loved conspiracy theories. As Clyde says, the young master's attitude was laudable. He says that when Euron fights the secret organization, he should just ask if he needs him. The protagonist wonders when his favorability got so high. He accepts and says they'll meet again later, thinking that Clyde is a simple-minded berserker with a good nature. Clyde tells him to trust him as he will spread the word that the young master was never trash and will make sure everyone hears the rumors. Staying close to Clyde could be useful. One day he'll be able to handle missions on his own, and that would be helpful. Eren says the young master worked hard, and Euron thanks her. She mentions his last technique, saying she's never seen anything like it. The protagonist says it was a new skill and asks what she thought. Eren says that watching it, she began to wonder. If she had faced it without seeing it first, she would have lost. But now she's sure she can block it. The protagonist thinks she wasn't bluffing. Among her abilities was the mirror of a quiet mind trait which was rare and powerful. Euron replies that she's been training as a knight since she was a child. If she hadn't become his guard, she would have been a knight. He asks if she's satisfied with how things are now. Eren doesn't understand the sudden question. As the day passes, Wellington rests in his office. The protagonist enters the room asking why the Marquis summoned him. His father calls him an idiot, saying that when it's just the two of them, he could call him dad. He was killing the mood. Euron just accepts, still puzzled. His father asks what exactly that technique he used yesterday was. Even after looking through books, he's never seen such a strange move. It had been a month since he started training. And no matter how rare a genius is, learning a technique on his own was impossible. He questioned what had happened and demanded that he tell the truth. The protagonist thought that he couldn't tell him the real story, but he had a good one prepared. He explained that he had found a book and his father asked about it. The young man confirmed it. While he was walking in the state library looking for manuals, he stumbled upon a book. He wondered who had left the book on the floor as he leaned his back against the wall. Suddenly, a book fell from the top of the dusty shelf. There was no title on the cover, just a strange symbol carved into it. The protagonist didn't think much of it and opened it. A light shot out from within, carving something directly into his mind, and then the book vanished completely. Wellington said that meant it was a magic tome. The protagonist nodded his head. He reflected that a magic tome was a rule he had made up himself. It held the power for a great mage to pass on their techniques. The Lord said that magic tomes worked that way, and even if he didn't know how, it might have been brought by his ancestors. Finding that book was a great stroke of luck for him. The protagonist decided he would call it an unexpected windfall. His father stood up saying a promise was a promise. He wouldn't make him learn swordsmanship anymore, and as an addition to his promise, he should say what he desires. The protagonist called to his father in a calm voice. He said he would like the position of heir, leaving Wellington shocked. But if he did that, his father couldn't guarantee it. Wellington thought for a moment and said that with his authority he could. The protagonist wondered why he seemed so uncomfortable. Because if he became the successor, it would be a problem. There would be many who would oppose the Marquis' house, especially the young lady who would cause a huge commotion. So this time he would make a concession. His father questioned this, but he quickly accepted and thanked him. Euron thought that he had no interest in the position of anyway. If he became the heir, he would be stuck with the Marquis all day, receiving education related to state management. Instead, he wanted to use his time to improve his skills in the four heavens of the Tang clan and travel the world to gain opportunities. Wellington told him to name something else he desired, and the protagonist said he wanted to form his own order of knights. He wanted Aaron, who was currently his butler, and Clyde, who he dueled with earlier, as his two knights. His father replied that it wasn't as difficult as the position of heir, and Aaron was a precious talent too, so it would be a waste to keep her as a butler. He should do as he wished, and Euron just thanked him. The Lord asked about his butler since there weren't many left at the moment. Euron replied that there was someone named Peru working in the kitchen, and he wanted him as his butler. But he would appreciate it if the Marquis would be the one to take the blame for giving him this chance. Wellington asked if something was going on, and Euron replied that he would explain later. His father just accepted with a sigh. The protagonist thought that his father seemed to trust him and didn't even ask questions, stopping to think. He had no idea how his favorability had grown. Maybe it was just because he was his son. Sighed. The protagonist announced that from this day on, the two of them were members of his exclusive order of knights. For now, they should train hard during practical training, and they should also welcome their new butler, Peru, who simply asked them to take care of him. Erin watched this in silence. She remembered she had a question for the young master yesterday. She wanted to know why he would put someone named Peru in her place as a butler. The protagonist scratched his head and replied that he was a spy sent by Commander Carrix of the White Eagle and Miss Kana to take his life. Erin said that even if that was true, she couldn't trust him nearby as a butler. The protagonist replied that now, he only listened to his orders. Clyde told the young master that he had a question. Euron replied that this was good and told him to go ahead. The aspirant replied that even with just the two of them, it was an order of knights, but it should have a chief or commander. Originally, the chief was the one with superior skills. But Erin was delicate and small, and she didn't look strong, so he should be the chief. The protagonist replied that he was right. The strongest knight should be the chief, so from now on, these two must have a duel. Only a few seconds passed before Clyde admitted defeat with Erin holding a sword to his neck. She said his attack patterns were too simple and needed a lot of improvement, telling him not to give up on his training. Clyde accepted and said he would keep her advice in mind. The protagonist simply accepted and announced that with this, the leader of this order of knights was decided. It would be Erin. He applauded her along with Peru. Peru announced he would prepare dinner first, and so the day passed. The young man thought he was far enough away but could still feel his energy. He should test his new technique. It involved using internal energy instead of voice to create sound waves and deliver them to his target's minds, a technique often used in wuxia stories. So he called out to Peru mentally. He replied to the young master turning around, but he noticed he wasn't nearby. The protagonist repeated his name a few more times, leaving his butler completely confused and scared. Euron asked why he seemed so surprised, and Peru complained that he was going crazy. He wanted to know if it was some kind of black magic, and the protagonist replied that it was a type of communication. Peru said that, just as he thought, he wasn't just affected by poison. He had heard that black mages can use both, so the young master must be something like that. The protagonist was confused and told him to think whatever he wanted. He asked if the poison he requested last time was ready, and Peru confirmed it. Snake's mind. A poison extracted from 100 venomous snakes was ready. The protagonist told him to make sure to put a lot of the poison in his celebration soup. Peru trembled with fear upon hearing this but accepted, saying he understood. The next day, the protagonist opened his eyes after meditating. He sighed deeply once more, thinking that he was still at the 3-star level and his internal energy wasn't growing as he had hoped. He didn't know how much time he had until the world's crisis. So he had no choice but to leave the Marquis's estate for now. He went to his father's room and announced that he was planning to leave. Wellington asked about it since it had been a while since he had gone out. He must be thinking of some city in the Marquis. The protagonist confirmed it, and his father asked how many days he would be gone. Yeren reflected that he was going far away, but he didn't need to reveal that, so he said he was thinking about a week. His father said he understood since he had been training a lot and asked who he wanted as an escort. The protagonist replied that he didn't particularly need one, leaving the lord confused. He told his son to be aware of his position. As he was the eldest son of Marquis, the protagonist replied that he was just going to a nearby city, so it would be strange to have an escort. Wellington shouted that he still didn't know how difficult the world was. He might have become strong, but he was afraid of him being poisoned. The protagonist thought that poisons didn't work on him anyway, but it seemed it would be difficult to persuade this man. He said he would do as he asked, and his father asked when he would leave. The protagonist replied that it would be in about 2 days, and Wellington decided he would prepare the escort. In his room, Euron thought that an escort would be useless since he was going to run away tomorrow. As evening fell that day, the protagonist called Peru to his room. He explained that he was going on a trip but had no money and was asking him to bring some. He must have the money Crocs gave him to buy expensive potions. When asked if he wasn't planning to hand it over, Peru denied it and said it was an honor, so he would bring it anyway. The protagonist asked if he had anything else because the last time he saw him bring poisonous herbs, he had a subspace pouch. It was a common item in fantasy novels, one that could easily hold about a ton. Peru said he would give it to the young master, though he was very reluctant. Euron accepted and thanked him since he wouldn't need a backpack anymore. But anyway, he told him to take something else, showing him his fake medicine. He said it was the 1-month antidote for his poison. The protagonist said that since he was doing a good job, he was counting on him in the future. And if he did well, he would give him the complete cure soon, which made Peru excited. The next day, near dawn, Euron mentions he left a package, so he should leave stealthily. He walks through the mansion with extreme ease. The young man thinks that, as expected, no one was around. A gardener notices the young master and says hello, mentioning that he woke up very early today. The protagonist just goes along with it, thinking he feels a lot of power coming from this benevolent-looking green gardener. So he decides to use his creator's eye, but he's surprised by what he reads. With the rest of the day ahead, the protagonist notes it's his first time out since leaving the Marquis's castle. He notices something different, the magic tower. A mage at the desk sees the young man and asks how he can help. Euron replies that he'd like to use the portal. The mage asks if he's used it before, and the protagonist says no. The young receptionist informs him they offer a mileage system, and the protagonist reflects that it's just like airplanes. The mage asks for his destination. Euron answers that he's going to Asura castle. The receptionist notes that it's quite far and says he understands. The fee is 50 gold, and after paying, he needs to sign the passport. The protagonist reflects that it's expensive as expected, but it's a good thing he has plenty of money. For now, he'll use a nickname, Paulian, which is what he used in games. The mage asks the gentleman to follow him. He's told to enter a room and that when he hears a knock, it means he has arrived. The protagonist enters and reflects that it's a beautiful arrangement. Suddenly, a bolt of lightning strikes the top of the castle. Euron is confused, but a man informs him that he has arrived and can now exit, welcoming him to Asura castle. Euron asks how he's already there since he didn't feel a thing. The mage replies that using the portal is comfortable, a point of pride for mages. Euron reflects on this feeling, wondering if he included something like this comfort in his story. The mage asks the client to use their services again and wishes him a good journey. The doors open and the protagonist comes face to face with a completely new place. This was Asura castle. Perhaps because it was an eastern region, different from the Marquis's domain, the architectural styles were different. Besides that, there were many people around. First, he needs to find a blacksmith ally, so he asks a local for information. He heads to a small house in an alley. Yurin reflects that he's been searching for a while but can't find the unicorn blacksmith. The sky was already growing dark. This was the last place and he needed to check it soon. A sword lay on an anvil and a blacksmith struck it with his hammer to shape it. The protagonist asks if anyone is there. The blacksmith notices the new customer and the protagonist confirms that's what he is, but he'd like to ask about something. Among the blacksmiths here, he wanted to know if he happened to know someone called the unicorn blacksmith. The man replies that he doesn't know any blacksmith by that name around here. Yurin wonders if he came to the wrong place, but the blacksmith says that, in any case, that was the name he planned to use for his shop soon. Yurin uses the creator's eye on him. He sees his name as Gyronox and that he has the demonic weapon creation trait. The protagonist thinks he's found the right place. He asks if he can take a look at the weapons he's selling. The blacksmith tells him he can go this way to browse. Yurin examines all the weapons and armor on the wall. He asks how business is going and the blacksmith is confused. But he says that since the shop is at the end of the hall and his skills aren't amazing, even though customers come by occasionally, they usually just look and leave. He's not sure how much longer he can keep this up. The protagonist reflects that this is interesting as the equipment here is no joke. He sees the wind spirit rapier, which increases attack and movement speed, and also the fire spirit longsword, which boosts strength and stamina. He asks if he made them himself. Yurin says yes. But when he finished them, they turned out to be major failures. Once crafted, the swords became abnormally heavy, and even a strong man couldn't lift them. So no one decided to buy them. Yurin thinks it's because unworthy hands touched the blades. If the right person were to hold them, the sword's power would emerge, and he still doesn't know how its true will works. So he announces he'll take both swords. Yurin replies they are failed pieces, but the protagonist says they're perfect to give to Aaron and Clyde. Reflecting that this wasn't the treasure he was looking for, he says that anyway, he wants to know if he has any very rusty weapons. The man doesn't understand. He shows him a box full of old tools. He says it's strange for him to ask for rusty weapons and that he was setting these things aside to sell later. These things wouldn't be used anyway. The protagonist puts his hand in, saying that this is just as he configured it. Yurin notices the weapon and replies that he didn't make it. It was already in the warehouse when he got here, and he has no idea where it came from. He was thinking of throwing it away since it was junk, but he kept it. The protagonist says he'll take the dagger too, and Gyronox is surprised. He says that since he only chose defective weapons, he'll charge just 2 gold and give him the dagger for free. The protagonist thinks this is a bargain because if the true nature of these weapons were revealed, he couldn't buy them for less than 200 gold pieces. But more than that, it was the blacksmith he wanted. So he brings up his failing business again and offers him a deal, close the shop and become his personal blacksmith. Gyronox says this is very sudden and doesn't know how to respond. He's not exactly against closing, but it's very abrupt. The protagonist decides to introduce himself first. He is the invincible spear that guards the south. Yurin Rocks of House Rocks. Gyronox is shocked to hear the name of the young master of the Marquis's family. He then kneels asking for the Lord's forgiveness as he never imagined he would come to such a filthy place. The protagonist tells him to stand up. Gyronox replies that there's no need as it's comfortable like this and tells him to speak freely. The protagonist accepts but insists he should still get up thinking that he can't escape the feudal mentality. Gyronox asks why he wants to employ a poor blacksmith like him. The protagonist replies that it's because of his special talent. The blacksmith says he has no such thing and that his master used to beat him every day. The protagonist reflects that he seems to have been trained in a brutal Spartan style. He then says that he visited many forges and saw various weapons today, but his were different. He showed great care and dedication to them. His swords were finely made, and especially their grips were meticulously crafted, which is vital to prevent a sword from slipping in battle. Seeing that dedication, he believes that one day he will awaken a truly special gift. The protagonist wonders if he can really recruit him. Gyronox replies that he will follow the young master, but he really wasn't like the rumors said. The protagonist asks if he means the one about him being trash. In any case, he's going to show the blacksmith something fun. He places the tip of his finger on the dagger and then commands it to awaken with his blood, for it is the relic Agnes of a million forms. The weapon begins to levitate and leaves the protagonist's hand. The blacksmith wonders what that is. It looked like a legendary ego sword, and Euron thinks that originally the protagonist was supposed to obtain it. The system asks if he wishes to form a soul contract with Agnes, and the young man proceeds. The soul takes on a different form with a strange kind of voice. It asks what the hell this is and who he thinks he is to make a contract with it because he has no talent anyway. The protagonist thinks it's disappointed by the lack of mana coming from him, but this way of speaking is very arrogant. The sword says this is annoying and that a useless guy like him wants to make a contract. Anyway, it wants to know how he knows about its release enchantment. The protagonist replies that he heard it from a great prophet, thinking he just made that up to make his story consistent. Agnes questions how the great prophet would have told anything to someone so useless, but says that in any case, he must know about its abilities. And the protagonist confirms. Agnes was a free-form weapon that could split into a primary and secondary body, able to become any weapon the user imagined. In the original story, the protagonist uses a sword and shield. Even if the secondary weapon is lost, it just returns to the main body. Agnes says he must not know how to use it as it can only be wielded with mana. This should make him give up. The protagonist watches in silence, muttering that she was the noisy type. He points at the weapon thinking he can wear it like a ring. Agnes says it was hot and felt like she was melting, while the protagonist thinks that internal energy works well with mana. Anyway, he calls for Gyronox. He asks how long he wants to stay, and the blacksmith replies that 2 days would be enough. In 2 days, at dusk, the protagonist would meet him at the castle's central park. On his way there, he recognizes a voice. Ilya asks what is going on and why he's there, leaving the protagonist confused. The protagonist has the same question, thinking the scene in front of the central park felt familiar. It was the scene where the original protagonist meets Ilya for the first time. The girl asks what's wrong with Euron, and he apologizes, thinking the original story has changed. Ilya dismounts her horse saying she had asked why he was there. The protagonist replies that he was looking for a blacksmith. She questions this. Since the Rock's family had many, Euron answers that he wanted to hire someone himself. The girl says if he had told her sooner, she would have helped, but the protagonist had already found someone good. He was just arriving, and Gyronox calls out, "Young master." He asks if he had been waiting long, but the protagonist says no, that he arrived at the perfect time. He introduces his fiancée, Ilya, just as someone interrupts, calling for the team leader. They were about to leave, and he wanted to know who this person was. Ilya calls over Musk and introduces her fiancé, Euron Rox. The man repeats the name fearfully. He says it's incredible to see a member of the Marquis Rox family in a place like this, introducing himself as the commander of the 5th Division of the Marcus family knights. His name was Musk Malone, and the protagonist says it's a pleasure to meet him. He reflects that he already knows enough, but to put it simply, this guy was a pathetic extra with an annoying personality. In the original story, when Musk and his knights were on the move, children blocked their path. The protagonist intervenes. A fight breaks out, and Ilya appears just in time to stop everything. That's how their relationship started. But the important part was this. The original hero was supposed to accompany Ilya into battle and save her from a life-threatening situation. But he couldn't just wait for that hero to appear, so he has no choice. He can't let her die. He calls out to the girl and asks where she's going. Ilya replies that because of the growing waves of orcs around Asu Castle, her knights were ordered to subjugate them. The protagonist says he has a favor to ask in that case. He wants to go with her, and Ilya asks why. The protagonist explains that as someone in training, he wants to experience real combat and test his skills. Ilya warns that it could be dangerous, but the protagonist just accepts, saying he's good at running. The girl stares for a moment, thinking. She agrees and orders Sir Musk to arrange for a horse. He tries to argue that they aren't going on a trip. And with orcs around, they can't let their guard down, especially since he can't sense any mana from him, and he has no obligation or desire to protect someone. Ilya calls his name one more time, Sir Musk. It's an order. He should stop talking and just do it. Musk mutters his acceptance, saying he will prepare it if it's an order. He would just do it, of course, all while radiating killing intent as he looks back. The protagonist and Ilya look at each other in silence. As the day goes on, she remarks that it's dangerous, and her fiancé should stay close. Euron simply agrees. He tells Gyronox to hold on tight, and he accepts the young master's order. And so the army begins to advance. In the area ahead, Ilya announces that for now, they will split into groups of 5 to find the orc village. They are not to attack first, but to fall back and signal if they find it. So they split up, and she heads down one path, turning with her group. They advance, and the day fades into night. A soldier comments that the tracks are far apart and hard to follow. Plus, it's getting dark, and he asks what they should do. Ilya says they have no choice and that they will turn back for now, but a sound suddenly startles the group. It was a signal flare. Then another from a different direction and more from other locations. Ilya asks how many they've seen so far. The total is 5, but Eren thinks to himself that there are only 4 since he hasn't signaled. The leader decides to head to the northwest desert first, so they start riding in that direction. As they get closer, Ilya notices something. All her soldiers are dead. The members of her group are horrified. Even their armor has melted. They wonder what could have hit them. Ilya orders them forward toward the signal flare from the south. They ride in that direction with extreme haste. She finds the same thing when she arrives. All her soldiers are dead. Her companion warns that they must move to the next area quickly, but Eren interrupts, saying they can't go now. Ilya questions this, calling her husband's name. The protagonist warns that the orcs are hunting the soldiers one by one. At this rate, they have no chance of victory. They must stop the operation and use a signal flare to gather their forces here. One of her soldiers tells him to be quiet, that he knows nothing about advancing information like this. This is all a mess because of a punk like him. Euron thinks that, in the original story, the protagonist was also blamed. He was cursed by the readers for dragging them through such a frustrating plot. He's having post-traumatic stress just thinking about it. Musk says he knows nothing about battle, but the protagonist tells him to shut up, leaving the soldier completely shocked. He suddenly falls to the ground in pain, and Ilya cries out in disbelief. She calls out to her fiancé as he tells the subordinate to know his place. Musk understands and begs for forgiveness. While the protagonist says he's been watching, he turns to Ilya, thinking how in the original story, she didn't listen to the protagonist and got lost in her own thoughts. Euron tells her to judge the situation for herself, asking if now is really the time for that. Ilya admits that, just as he said, she failed to think about the situation calmly. They must send up the blue signal flare immediately to gather the troops here. The signal flares up into the sky moments later, visible throughout the forest. Euron rests with the group. Jiranak says the young master was incredible. He made them move according to his will. The protagonist replies that it was nothing. The blacksmith says the soldiers will gather here again, but Euron says maybe, because most of the soldiers won't be able to make it. He reflects that it's because of that bastard, Karuta. Garanax calls out to the young master, asking what he's waiting for. The protagonist replies, a real battle. A subordinate runs toward them, calling for the squad leader, telling her to run, that she should just get away now. Ilya questions him, raising her sword toward a noise. An immense group of orcs is walking toward them, a massive army. Musk complains that it's an insane number of monsters. Ilya is stunned. She apologizes to Eren, saying they're going to die because of her. The protagonist replies that it's all right. We're not going to die here. She asks what her fiancé is going to do. He calls for Agnes and says they're going to test what they've been practicing for the past 2 days, using the fake body to create black iron pellets. The 3-star skill he got from the body, which he hadn't had a chance to test yet, was black iron explosion. He then throws the pellet toward them, and it radiates immense energy. The ball just hits an orc's axe, and they start to laugh until an explosion happens, engulfing the entire area. Their numbers decrease significantly from the protagonist's single blow. He waves his hand, commanding the black iron explosion to return, thinking that Agnes' ability synergized with his own skills. The other orcs decide to charge at the young man, but he just throws the ball again, causing another immense explosion in the area. Ilya asks what he just threw. The protagonist says they are black iron spheres and that he'll explain in detail later. However, the number of orcs has dwindled significantly. Ilya asks her army what they're doing. They can win this. Now's our chance. We must defeat the remaining orcs. Charging at the creatures, Ilya manages to sever one of their heads. Her subordinates, with great effort, manage to pierce another. One of the watching orcs is stunned, but this time he comes face to face with a reddish figure. He looks up in fear just as the figure grabs his head with its hand. Ilya and her army turn around suddenly. She wonders what that thing is. It was absurdly large, and the creature had just blown up the orc's head. The protagonist thinks that he's finally here. That was Karuta, the legendary orc warrior. If they don't capture this bastard today, they will all lose their lives. Karuta lets out a roar that torments everyone in the area. He sets his sword stance and leaps toward Ilya. The girl thinks she needs to dodge, but her fiancé grabs her, asking why she's just standing there. Pulling her away from the attack's impact, he says they almost lost their lives. Ilya is stunned, seeing that her subordinates are dead. Karuta roars as he stares at the protagonist. Yorin just throws a black iron explosion at him. It nears the orc's neck and then detonates. But Karuta remains untouched and roars once more. He mutters something as he walks toward the protagonist. Yorin wonders if it's not working. The setup was for an orc warrior, and its skin was as hard as steel. Ilya curses the bastard, questioning how he dared to take her subordinates' lives. She emanates her sword aura, saying she won't forgive this. Then she charges forward with her skill at extreme speed, clashing her sword against the orc warriors on equal footing. They exchange a few blows, but Karuta remains unshaken, just defending against everything. The subordinates cheer for their team leader, saying she's so cool. Yorin thinks that, as expected of Ilya, her sword queen trait was broken. But it was still the beginning of the novel to think she's strong enough to push Karuta to this point and even cut through his armor and skin. The monster gets enraged when it's truly hit for the first time, catching the girl's attention. He lets out a roar as he emanates his aura, and Ilya wonders how he's able to do that. Karuta glances to the side and swings his sword quickly, forcing Ilya to block. Just like in the original story, Ilya was defeated by Karuta. The soldiers go to take care of their team leader. Ilya says it's humiliating, but she can't defeat this monster. They need to flee as it's the only way to survive, but the protagonist takes the lead in the battle. The orc calls out to Irin in its beastly tongue. Meanwhile, the protagonist just wields his dagger and prepares to throw it, launching his direct burst at the creature. The blow is easily deflected by Karuta. Irin thinks that the dagger thrown with the direct burst was destroyed with a single blow, just as he expected. The monster roars again, trying to communicate with the protagonist, but it gets confused when it notices something. On its shoulder guard, there were remnants of the black iron explosion, causing a massive chain reaction. Karuta gets injured by the blow, and his right arm becomes the protagonist says the first one he threw was a fake, and he was too busy blocking the direct hit to notice the one behind him. His skin might be steel, but it seemed his entire body wasn't. His weak spot was still the crack in the armor, so he couldn't just aim there. The monster trembles in fear at the protagonist's plan. Then, it charges toward him with instinctive force. It attempts a horizontal slash, but Yorin manages to dodge. The monster tries to attack again, but he's always avoided. Yorin moves his dagger, wondering where it's trying to get. Just then, another explosion goes off in the creature's face. The protagonist says that's all it was afraid of, but he has no intention of letting it capture him easily. The orc turns to look at Gyronax, then it walks toward the man while the protagonist just screams for it not to. Karuta leaps toward the blacksmith. The protagonist curses the situation and releases his internal energy as he has to save him somehow, pouring as much inner energy as he can into the draconic treasure steps. The monster tries to hit the blacksmith, but the protagonist stops it at a speed that even leaves after images. The blast hits the ground with force, and Karuta turns around. Ilya says it's impossible and that his speed just now was incredible. The protagonist decides he'll end the fight now and calls for Agnes. One of the high-level hidden weapons of the Tang clan's four heavens was the bloody flower butterfly. He then launches it at the orc while using curved shot. The butterfly flies slowly toward the orc. It moves gracefully and delicately. Ilya says it's a beautiful strike while the orc trembles in fear. It tries to deflect the butterfly with its sword, but it dodges every attack until the butterfly breaks through its defense and touches its chest, making the orc scream in a pain it has never felt before, causing a final explosion. Yorin watches this, a bit apprehensive, and Ilya is astonished. The protagonist isn't sure, but with the amount of power he put into the bloody flower butterfly, it was more than enough to pierce an orc warrior's chest. It was truly overwhelming. Musk says it's down and they've won the battle. Ilya turns, saying it's not over yet because there are still small orcs left around. She tells her army to finish them off. Yurinox thanks the young master for saving him, and the protagonist reflects that the first real battle ended safely. That night in the army camp, the protagonist asks if Ilya got hurt. She says she's not okay, but since she's in his debt, she can't complain. The protagonist says it's fine for them to help each other, and it's only natural considering what she asked earlier. He doesn't train in swordsmanship but in hidden weapons, leaving the girl confused. The protagonist confirms it, saying the explosive sphere and the butterfly at the end were his hidden weapons. She finds it unbelievable because they were so powerful. Euron reflects that it must be hard for her to accept. He's sure she spent her whole life thinking the sword was the best weapon, but now her horizons have expanded. A knight informs the captain that he has prepared a magic bag. Ilya accepts and says they might not be able to find all the bodies right now, but they should at least take the leader's head, plunging her sword into Karuta's body. She lifts the head, saying its size is incredible, and if they put it directly in the magic bag, it'll get all dirty. Ilya says it's fine. The bags were made for storing enemy heads, so they shouldn't feel bad about it. But since night is falling, they should head back now. So they move out on horseback as Musk finds the captain. She asks where he's been since the signal fire was lit a long time ago. The man acts confused and says they were ambushed by orcs far from here and were delayed because of the fight. Ilya understands but wants to know where the others are, as only 2 of them remain. Musk replies that they were defeated and the orcs were stronger than they expected. But the captain demands to see the bodies and orders him to take her to them, while the knight tries to change the subject. He walks toward her as Ilya continues to give orders. Then he says he'll explain where they were positioned first until he stealthily draws a dagger to try and attack Ilya, but the protagonist severs his arm. Musk falls to the ground, writhing in pain. Euron says he claimed to be fighting orcs, but there isn't a drop of green blood on him, only red. He's not falling for that. He was clearly collaborating with the creatures, leaking information from the start. Musk asks how he found out. Ilya draws her sword, saying that's just how it is. The man tries to say the Malone family had great achievements serving the Marquis family, but she just calls it a load of crap, telling him to stop as she cuts him again. And so the night continues at the noble residence in Osso Castle. Eurynox wakes the young master, calling his name a few times. Euron gets up and asks what he needs, but the blacksmith says it's almost lunchtime. Besides, Captain Ilya is here to see him. The girl appears wearing a black dress and asks if her fiancé slept well. The protagonist is completely confused. He asks what's with the outfit. Ilya replies that Euron must come to her house because her father told her to make sure she brought him along, and she asks if he'll come. The protagonist thinks that seeing her up close, calling her the most beautiful woman in the world, is no exaggeration, and he says he'll definitely go. Ilya says she'll wait for him out front and that he should get ready to leave. Euron starts to think for a moment, noticing that her favorability just keeps growing since he helped her that one time. Outside, the protagonist calls out to Ilya and apologizes for keeping her waiting. The people outside glorify the iron-blooded knight, Miss Ilya, who single-handedly defeated the orc warrior, and the glory was all hers. Euron thinks this title was given to her for not giving up even when facing death, and it was the same as in the novel. The people also shouted that he was Lord Euron, the Iron Mage, and that he was extremely handsome. The protagonist is confused by this, thinking these nicknames spread from the soldiers who witnessed it. He figures they saw him manipulating metal spheres and thought he was a mage when Ilya suddenly calls out to him. She says she's mentioned it before, but she's very grateful for being saved twice. The protagonist says she doesn't need to mention it as it was only natural. The girl explains that at dawn, she went to the forest to recover the bodies from the terrible battlefield. It was heartbreaking to see all their bodies cut down throughout the forest. Then she realized something. If it weren't for him yesterday, they would have ended up the same way. The protagonist looks down, lost in thought. Ilya declares she will train harder and become stronger. She would surpass everyone without exception and never be defeated again, while Euron thinks that her talent has truly blossomed. The mages prepare a portal to the Marquis estate, and Ilya explains that since it wasn't far, her father sent the family's mages. They should go now, she says, as they meet in the middle of the portal. Those mages begin their conjuration and the teleportation magic is cast. Euron and Gyronox are astonished by this. Meanwhile, Ilya says it's been a while since he last visited her territory. The protagonist thinks that in the blink of an eye, the scenery changed and he feels a little dizzy. Eurynox wonders if all noble families have such immense residences. In any case, it seemed the protagonist was invited for a meal. In the original story, the protagonist only ate Chayrain soup from the Marquis's estate every day. But today, he would finally taste real noble cuisine. The Marquis welcomes his son-in-law, telling Euron to come in. Euron tries to bow, but he's told to just sit down as there's no need for formality. The young man simply accepts and sits across from Ilya. Marcus says he should first thank him because before being his fiancée, she is his daughter, and he is grateful that he saved Ilya's life. The protagonist says it was nothing much, just something he had to do. Then the meal is brought to them. The protagonist waits anxiously for it to be revealed. It was the special chirene soup of the Marcus family. The Marquis says that much like the Rox family, they have their own secret recipe, and their tradition is to eat chirene after a battle, so he should please enjoy it. And Irin thanks him for the food while trying to convince himself he is capable. Suddenly, while they are eating, the Marquis asks when they plan to get married. The protagonist is confused, and the Marquis clarifies he's talking about his daughter. Irin thinks it must be a test since the Marquis must dislike him as his affection level was 10 even after he saved his daughter. So he replies that he would marry her right now if he could, and Ilya gets embarrassed. The protagonist continues, saying he isn't the family heir yet and his annoying past made people look down on him. To be worthy of Ilya, he would change himself, and once he becomes the heir, he will take her as his wife. The Marquis questions if he thinks that's possible, as he's heard his younger brother is considered a genius. And did he really think he could surpass him and become the heir? Euron replies that he is definitely capable. The Marquis laughs, saying he has really changed just as the rumors said and that he would support him. But he changes the subject, saying that before he arrived, a message came from Wellington. News of his presence had already reached the Rox family through magic communication. The protagonist asks what his father said, and the Marquis says they should communicate after the meal. The protagonist just thanks him and looks at Ilya eating, wondering why she was in a bad mood again. In any case, it seemed he was able to leave a good impression on Marquis Marcus. In another room, the communication begins, and a mage takes the sphere to the Rox household. It then begins to project the Lord's image, and the protagonist thinks it's like a projector or a video call. The young man calls out to his father and asks for forgiveness while his father curses the brat. But he asks if he was hurt anywhere, and the protagonist says no. Wellington changes the subject right after. He wants to know if it's true that he saved Ilya and took the life of an orc warrior. The protagonist replies that he just got a little lucky. His father understands and says he'll hear the details when he returns, asking when he would be coming home. Euron decides he will return the day after tomorrow. His father tells him to bring his brother when he comes, leaving the young man shocked. The Marquis mentions that Irin will be leaving soon. He says it would be nice if he stayed a few more days, and Irin replies that he would like to. However, his father had given him a task. The Marquis says it's a shame and offers to provide a magic portal so he can travel comfortably. Euron sighs but decides to refuse even though he's grateful. He was at a stage where he needed to improve his skills by training himself, and it would be better not to rely on a teleport. The Marquis says he really has become a different person. He was excited to find out how strong he would become, and the protagonist thanks him. Ilya smiles at that response, and Euron thinks she must have liked it. Outside, the protagonist thinks that he has a reason for not using the Marcus family's teleport. Gyronox says the path to the capital is the other way, and that Euron had said they were going there. The protagonist explains they have a place to stop before that, the great mountain to the Marquis known as the Dragon's Clearing. Gyronox asks about it, and Euron says he wants to go there before heading to the forge. He asks if the young master will make a wish too, but the protagonist says no. He was going to take possession of a treasure instead, one the original protagonist would have found later. They continue walking through the area. The cave called Dragon's Clearing was the home of an ancient species, and his subordinate comments that it's early, but there are many people. He asks if there's really a treasure there, but the protagonist says it's a fake place and the world is full of secrets. So he should follow as they're heading to the front of the mountain, and Gyronox agrees. They walk on, and the blacksmith, breathing heavily, comments that there's nothing there. The protagonist wonders if this is it, the entrance he had configured in the shape of a car door. Wondering if anyone is around, he turns his head from side to side. The protagonist decides he'll just open the car door. They are astonished when the door suddenly takes shape and opens sideways. Gyronox says this is completely impossible, but the protagonist decides they'll just go in. They walk inside and the stone closes behind them. The blacksmith remarks that it's brighter inside than he expected, seeing that the light came from a gemstone. Euron tells him not to touch it as it would trigger a trap. Gyronox asks what kind of trap it is. The protagonist explains that the entire space would likely become a sea of fire and they would be burned alive. There were many traps around, so he should stay close to him. And the blacksmith simply agrees. They walk towards an altar standing before it. Jironox says it's incredible, but there's nothing on top. The protagonist asks if he knows what's hidden behind it. The fake dragon's clearing ends here, and behind this wall, he can feel the energy of the people outside who are now praying for them. The protagonist decides they will look at the treasure anyway. He pushes the knob under the altar. An entrance opens up, and Jironox says it's unbelievable. Inside were 3 bags of gold coins. Euron picks up a box thinking that what's inside is more valuable than the gold. It was the warrior's jade with a rebirth effect, and it was essential for getting stronger. They move on, and Jironox asks where they should go. Euron says it's to the magic tower in Isu Castle. The blacksmith notes that even at this hour, there were still many people praying out front. Then, the young man notices a calm presence and pressure. He uses the creator's eye on a woman. However, nothing happens, and the protagonist thinks she only appears later in the novel. Jironox asks what that was. The protagonist wonders how her aura could be so powerful. She was an existence he couldn't possibly defeat right now, so he needs to get out of there fast. He calls for Jironox and tells him they should hurry to the castle. He was starving, and his blacksmith tries to call out to the young master, begging him to please wait. The hooded figure who was walking away turns back. Later at the castle, he thinks that something still wasn't right. That person was only supposed to appear much later in the story. He wonders why she appeared now, and in that place of all places. That monster only goes after the dragon's horde much later on. It seems the story's pacing has changed, even if just a little, and he has no idea where the protagonist is or what he's doing. But he takes the pearl, saying there's no point in saving it and that he should just eat it now. Urine begins to circulate his CUI, noticing it felt like his body was about to melt. The system initiates the rebirth process, evolving him into a stronger physique. After some time, the cultivation ends. Euron opens his eyes, and the system notifies him that he has awakened the celestial martial body. In martial arts novels, this almost always appears as the supreme constitution for any technique, allowing the user to replicate any move just by seeing it once. His body felt as light as a feather when Jironox appeared at the door, calling for his master. The protagonist tells him to come in. Jironox says he's finally awake, but then he notices something. He comments that the young master has gotten much taller than before. Euron says it must be his imagination. Jironox replies that it wasn't, and as a blacksmith, he can measure anything just by sight. Yesterday he was exactly 5'10", and now he's 6 narrow. Euron comments that his eyesight is pretty incredible, thinking it doesn't matter anyway since he grew taller thanks to the celestial martial body. The teleportation room. A mage asks how he can help them. Euron replies that he'd like to use the teleporter. The mage asks where he wants to go. The protagonist explains that he's going to the capital. The official informs him that travel to the capital is currently forbidden. Due to potential threats against the royal family, common citizens without renown are prohibited from traveling there. Euron thinks it's a shitty class-based society, but it's not like he can do anything about it. But he states that he is the first son of Marquis Rox, and the one with him is his personal blacksmith, Jironox. All the mages there are completely stunned, saying he's the steel mage, Iron Nox. The protagonist confirms that it's him. The mages then start asking how he can summon so many steel spheres and what the magic formula is for making them explode. They want to know how he designates a target and why they can't feel any mana from him. Then another man strikes his staff on the ground and says, "That's enough." Iron wonders where he is, and the mage apologizes for his disciple's lack of tact. The protagonist asks who he is. That mage replies that he is the leader of the magic tower in the Asi territory. His name is Yubian, which surprises Euron. He was a character he had only added as filler. On the outside, he was a kind old man. But in reality, he was a serial killer in disguise who would take anyone's life without mercy. He wonders why he keeps running into so many monsters one after another. Yubian announces that he will use this room to teleport them to the capital, and the protagonist thanks him. But the mage continues, saying that for some reason, he feels he will meet Lord Euron again. The protagonist trembles in fear, saying, of course. A bolt of lightning strikes the magic tower in the capital. Another mage announces that they have arrived and should exit the teleportation room, welcoming them to the capital. Jironox asks why everything there is so fancy, noting that even the clothes look expensive. The protagonist suggests he buy some clothes with the money he earned, but the blacksmith refuses. They start to comment on how huge the Royal Knights Academy looks. A guard asks how he can help, and the protagonist replies that he's there for a visit. The guard asks for his name and who he is visiting. Euron introduces himself and says he's there to see his younger brother, Colin Rocks. Someone approaches from behind, calling out to the protagonist. Euron thinks he's a handsome boy with gray hair and must be from the Alien Duchy of the North. The protagonist confirms that he is from the Rocks family. That guy asks if he's the one who defeated the orc warrior. If so, he must be very strong, which startles Euron. He wonders why this guy is speaking so casually when they've never met before. The man calls out to him again. Euron replies that he's flattered but wants to know who he is. The young man introduces himself as Carrick Ellion, the Duke's second son. He says he's a friend of Colin's, and Euron says he understands. The young man starts guiding them, saying he'll take them to Colin. Euron thinks he doesn't seem very friendly, but it's better to follow him, so he tells Girinox to wait. While walking, Carrick mentions that he and Lady Ilia defeated an orc together. He can understand how Lady Ilia did it, as she's a promising knight, but Euron took her by surprise. Not much is known about him, and he wants to know if he's really a magic user. Euron replies that he can't say much, but he's not a mage. Carrick smiles, asking if that's so. He says they should get going, and Euron wonders why the guy is smiling. Carrick announces that they've arrived at a training ground. A young man says that Lord Carrick has returned. The noble asks if they've seen Colin. The purple-haired boy replies that he had taken him to the professor earlier. Euron thinks so he took Colin away but brought me here. Carrick introduces the protagonist as the heir of Rocks and the one who helped Lady Ilia defeat the orc warrior. And Lord Euron said he isn't a mage, just as I suspected. That means he's a close-quarters fighter. People start murmuring that he uses daggers and throws steel spheres and butterflies. Carrick says everyone is curious and suggests the protagonist show off his skills a bit. Euron agrees, thinking he has no choice. Carrick arranges for him to fight Melrai, an intermediate rank student, but he questions if Lord Euron doesn't use daggers. The protagonist says it's fine since it's not a real fight, so he doesn't need to use them. Carrick comments that he heard he couldn't wield a sword, but that he should do his best. Euron thinks that because they're elite nobles, they're looking down on him just for using daggers. He decides to use this chance to test his new celestial martial body. Melrai tells him to come at him, saying he'll let him have the first strike. The protagonist simply raises his sword and brings it down toward his opponent's head. Melrai scoffs at this and tries to block, but the force of the blow drives his own sword into his head. Carrick is stunned and asks what that was, with the young man now knocked out on the ground. He says that Melrai let his guard down way too much. He apologizes but suggests another round, calling for Mula. He was stronger and advanced intermediate class and is told not to underestimate his opponent after seeing what happened to Melrai. Mula says not to compare him to that muscle-headed pig. The match begins with the young man charging forward. However, Euron doesn't move, thinking his movements seem incredibly slow. This must be the power of the celestial martial body. He thinks he'll just use a normal attack and moves his sword forward. Mula tries to block in the same way, but ends up getting hit in the forehead. Carrick is shocked and asks how it happened again. Euron reflects that thanks to the celestial martial body, his strength, speed, and reflexes were far beyond those of an ordinary person. He questions if the Knights Academy only produces weaklings. Carrick approaches, asking if Lord Euron would fight one more time. This time, he would be the opponent as he was the strongest one there. The protagonist easily accepts. Standing opposite Carrick, the match begins. The young man stares at his opponent and advances rapidly, circling him with a technique that creates several clones. Euron thinks he's fast, and it feels like he's fighting multiple opponents at once. It's a tactic that exploits openings. But with the enhanced reflexes of the celestial martial body, he could see him easily dodging Carrick's attack. The protagonist counterattacks, his sword striking his opponent's forehead. Another one is knocked out on the ground in an instant. The students are dumbfounded until someone asks what just happened. Everyone calls out for Lord Colin, who repeats the question. They want to know who he is. Euron thinks that this man was none other than his younger brother, the sword genius, Colin Rocks. A student says that his older brother, Euron, just arrived, and Colin asks, "Where's the fat guy?" He looks from side to side. The student says he's right there, and Colin asks how that guy could be Euron. He's supposed to be fat like he's always been. He screams that it's impossible when he finally recognizes him. Euron replies that he just lost a little weight. Colin says it wasn't just that and that he also got taller. The protagonist replies that losing weight also made him grow a bit, but Colin asks what's wrong with those guys on the ground. A student explains everything that happened there. Colin shouts that it's impossible, so that rumor about him defeating an orc warrior was true. The protagonist confirms this, and Colin asks how. But Irin gets irritated that he just addressed his brother so casually. Colin shouts that he doesn't believe it. It was impossible for him to have gotten so strong. The protagonist asks if his brother is really going to do this, and Colin tells him to stop as he never considered him a brother. He did nothing but be born 2 years before him and calls him a pig. Euron replies that he'll show him why he's the older brother and tells him to bring it on. Colin says that's exactly what he wants, but the protagonist says he wants to make a bet. The loser must grant the winner one request. Colin agrees and says that when he wins, he'll make him lick his feet. He then tells someone to hand him his sword. A student whispers something in Colin's ear. Euron thinks they must be talking about how he defeated those guys earlier. The blonde says they should begin and focuses his aura on the sword. Euron reflects that he wasn't holding back and was going all out from the start. The system shows that Colin had the traits of Agile Sword, Agile Body, and Sword Emperor, along with extreme displeasure. Euron reflects that he was the one with an innate talent for the sword, which is why he's so confident, as he's probably never lost to anyone. But he wonders about something because no matter how he looks at it, he doesn't feel like he's going to lose. He dodges Colin's attack and prepares his sword above his head. He strikes at the leg, not wanting to end it quickly like he did with the other three. He's going to make his brother a punching bag now. 10 minutes later, he was still dodging all of Colin's attacks and counter-attacking. His brother was completely beaten up from the blows, and the students were astonished by this. Colin asks his older brother to stop, saying he gives up. Euron questions if he's still speaking to him so casually. He then continues to beat his brother. Colin begs him to please stop. Euron warns that if he messes with him again, he'll get beaten twice as hard. The blonde agrees with him, so the protagonist makes his request. He tells him that from now on, whenever they're together, he must call him Big Bro. Colin says that's too much. Euron asks if he doesn't like it, and the blonde begs him to stop calling him by that name. Then the protagonist announces they should leave for the Empire where their third brother, Leon, is. They use the teleport to the Imperial capital, and Gyronax comments that he can't believe they arrived through the magic tower. Euron says they are neutral territories with one in every nation. Still, the architecture had a somewhat modern feel, and he comments that this is the Imperial Knights Academy. So Colin should go in and bring Leon this time, returning after a few minutes with his younger brother. Euron calls out to him and thinks that he's tall. Leon asks if it's really Euron, and the protagonist confirms it, congratulating Colin on a job well done. The blonde replies that it was nothing and calls him Big Bro. Leon says he's heard about him, and the protagonist says they should go home. But the younger brother says there's a problem. The Imperial capital was under quarantine. They can enter, but they can't leave, because this morning, the Crown Prince of the Empire lost his life. Colin repeats the information, and Euron thinks that this was something not even he knew. Leon replies that it's true. It happened at dawn. Euron thinks that's why, on his way to the Knights Academy, he saw the streets crowded with soldiers, not to mention how tense the atmosphere was. Leon says he only heard rumors, so he can't say for sure. But the prince's fiancée from another kingdom had arrived just a few days ago. And the crown prince was very proud of himself, so he called her to the training grounds at dawn to show her his swordsmanship. And as he approached the applauding princess, suddenly, sharp stone spikes shot up from under him, piercing the prince's body instantly. The priests inside tried everything to save him, but he was already lifeless. Colin asks if it was magic, noting that magic is forbidden in the imperial and royal palaces. Leon replies that's why all the tower masters were summoned to the palace. And right now, everything is in complete chaos. Colin says that the crown prince losing his life during training right in front of his fiancée is terrifying. Euron thinks he's sure he knows who the assassin was, why they did it, and where they were at that moment. The group behind this will soon emerge across the continent, and they started by taking the crown prince's life. But that was only supposed to happen around the middle of the story. And he wonders what happened, as it seemed the timeline had been altered and this event occurred earlier. He needs time to get stronger before that happens. But maybe now that he has the celestial martial body, things could be different. He then calls his brothers, and Leon asks why Colin keeps calling him Big Bro. Euron asks what the most famous inn is. Leon replies that it's the Dragon's Tear and the Giant's Faith. The protagonist tells them to fill out the departure form and then go to the magic tower to issue an exit request for the four of them. With their names and alibis, it shouldn't take long. Leon asks what he will do. Euron says he's going to meet an old friend. They shouldn't fight with Garanax. Leon asks if he had friends in the capital before as night falls in the capital near a bar. Euron says that's the Flamberg, a bar that only opens for nobles. He's going to change into the clothes he prepared earlier. Once he's dressed, the next step is he calls for Agnes, and the ring complains that it was sleeping. He asks if the ring can disguise his face, and Agnes is surprised. Questioning how he even knows about that, the protagonist says he just had a feeling it could. Agnes grumbles, wanting to know who he wants to look like. The protagonist looks back and says he wants to look like that person leaving. Agnes says it's perfect, as it will summon skin in liquid form and then spread it all over his face. Just like that, the protagonist quickly takes on the appearance of that noble. A guard calls out to Baron Very, asking why he's back already. Euron says it wasn't in his plans, he suddenly felt like having another drink. The guard tells him not to drink so much this time and lets him in. A waiter asks if Baron Very has returned, and Euron says he'll have another glass of what he was drinking before. His infiltration was a success. Now, he would focus his energy on his hearing. He listens to tons of completely disconnected and unnecessary conversations until he hears someone confess to taking a life. The attendant says she's joking, but the girl asks what she's going to do. That young man says that one love can only be forgotten by another, and she will surely find someone better. The woman says that talking to him always makes her feel better. Euron observes from a distance and thinks he'll try a telepathic message, calling her by the name Envy. He asks if she had fun with the crown prince. Envy questions who's there with that voice, then she turns around calling him a bastard. The entire building starts to crack. People panic, screaming that the building is collapsing. From the middle of the rubble, Euron jumps away, thinking she had suddenly gone crazy. Envy asks where that guy from a moment ago went. The protagonist thinks he knew she was strong, but not this strong. She calls out for that human, saying she'll tear him to pieces. Euron wonders if he can even beat her, but it doesn't matter. He has to try, and that's why he came here. First, he'll make a weapon. Returning to his normal form, he thinks he'll take the secondary body and turn it into a dagger. Envy asks if this is his true appearance. She says he's quite handsome and that she'll capture him alive and make him a trophy. She then leaps towards him. Euron easily dodges the spikes, but she uses the direct throw skill. The dagger is thrown far away, and he thinks she did it like it was nothing. In that case, he uses the black iron explosion. The sphere approaches Envy's face, causing a huge area of destruction. She asks what that was because it did nothing. He used some pretty interesting magic. Euron thinks he has no choice, so he'll use the same attack that took down the orc warrior, unleashing the bloodflower butterfly. The butterflies fly toward Envy, but she just pierces them with her legs. Euron thinks it's over, that he has nothing left to use, wondering what to do now. To prevent casualties, he has no choice. He has to hold on until the Imperial Guards arrive. Envy creates more spikes and charges at Euron, but he dodges. He ducks his head and then leaps away. He mutters that it was a close call. If he keeps dodging like this, he's going to die. Even though he hasn't properly learned it, he'll use a sword. Instead of guiding it for hidden weapons, he'll use its blade energy. Envy screams for him to come on. The protagonist easily dodges a few more spikes and cuts her in half. He thinks it was tough, but he can keep going, so there's still a chance to win. Envy comments that he's quite amusing, and she'll have to see what to do next, wondering how long he can last. Several spikes shoot toward the young man. He thinks that the number keeps increasing. Still, he thinks he can handle it as Envy tells him to try and block. She's suddenly surprised, looking down at her body. From the beginning, he had been poisoning her without her noticing, activating the prolonged poison, the blood poison art, and the burning flame. But the paralysis would only last a second. Euron wonders why it's so short. He activates dragon steps and runs quickly. Euron starts climbing Envy's legs. He lands the first strike just as the paralysis effect wears off. And through the cut, he creates a black iron explosion using all his internal energy. Envy is sliced open, the sphere hovering in the gash before it begins to glow, causing mass destruction in the area. Euron backs away, saying he finally did it, wondering if he got her until the monster's body starts to return to normal. Euron tries to deny it. Envy tells him to wait, saying it was impossible. This time, she would finish him. The protagonist thinks that he forgot. These monsters have several phases before they actually die, and with each phase, their strength and magical power increase absurdly. He yells that it's the second phase. Envy moves her legs and tells the protagonist to go to hell. Urine dodges one of the spikes and does it again, realizing it was faster and more unpredictable than before. At this rate, he's going to die until a spike gets close and manages to hit him, a grazing blow tearing his shoulder. Urine dodges, thinking this is crap. He almost lost his head. If he makes one mistake, he'll die. He needs to run. Envy asks where he's going, stomping the ground with her leg. Urine jumps again to avoid another blow and repeats the move. But more spikes were approaching and the creature starts to laugh. Do you really think you can escape so easily? You can try as much as you want. Urine thinks this is crap. Elsewhere, a hooded figure approaches. People scream that a monster has appeared and they need to call the guards. A monster covered in stone spears appeared in the southern district. The hooded woman says it can't be, that it's Envy. A man wonders if they were really stone spears, asking himself if it had anything to do with the prince. The hooded woman teleports to the top of the building, observing the battle site and then leaping towards it. Envy's spikes charge towards Urine. She asks how about they end this. The spikes approach at immense speed. Urine wonders if he's going to die. The system announces that facing a true life or death situation, 2 special privileges have been unlocked. He could use Creator's Eye Level 2 and see the trajectory of the opponent's attack. Urine sees the attack's trajectory aimed for his head, allowing him to dodge. He avoids each of Envy's blows, thinking it wasn't so hard. He can dodge with minimal movement. If he gets better at this, he could dodge with his eyes closed. Envy asks how he managed to do that. The second privilege was the Realm of Ascension, which has been opened for a limited time. The protagonist's internal energy was increasing. A white energy was forming around his sword. It must be sword chi. With this energy, he could win this battle. A woman watches and comments that a Knight of Light has appeared. The spikes approach Urine, but he cuts through them with extreme ease. He gets closer and closer to Envy. The monster can't believe it as the protagonist leaps for the final blow. He makes one cut and splits the monster in half. The little girl at the window comments that the Knight of Light defeated the monster. Urine sighs in exhaustion, and the system notifies him of it. The protagonist comments that he barely managed to win and needs to use what little strength he has left to get out of there until he turns his back, surprised as he feels a wave of energy. Envy begins to pull herself back together. The protagonist wonders how it's happening so fast. This was Phase 3, the final version. Envy says he won't get away with this. The protagonist thinks he doesn't even have a chance to recover. Envy emanates more energy, saying she will take his life, repeating the same phrase as she contorts. The spikes approach rapidly, and Urine says his internal energy is almost depleted. This could be the end. He tries to avoid the spikes, but they stop at the last second. Envy asks what that was. Looking back, she sees she's being wrapped up by someone. Lust moves her hand quickly. Envy asks if she didn't see. The woman tells her to stop because it's not yet time for them to reveal themselves. Urine wonders what that was. He met that thing after they left the dragon's lair. It was lust of the 7 deadly sins. So he thinks if it's not time to reveal themselves, it means they're going to retreat. She tells Envy that they should go. Urine comments that at least he survived, but he looks to the side and notices the guards were there now. It would be problematic to run into them, so it was better to avoid it. At dawn, Gironac says the young master has finally returned. The protagonist asks if something happened and if his brothers are still asleep. Gironac says a terrorist appeared in the city last night and they left at dawn, saying they were going to catch the culprit. Urine comments that kids are like that. In that case, he'll sleep a little before leaving. Gironac agrees and says he'll be outside in case he's needed. The protagonist thinks the battle against Envy was complicated. But thanks to it, he reached the 4th star of the Divine Poison Energizing Technique. But he also realized how weak he still was, since he couldn't even defeat Envy, the weakest of the sins, directly. There's still a long way to go. But when the time comes, even more terrifying sins will appear. He needs to get stronger even faster. Colin mentions that the Crown Prince's killer appeared, and that he would have finished him. But Leon says the guy is not on his level. They say it was a monster far beyond human capabilities, and stone spears sprouted from its body, crushing buildings. But suddenly, something happened. A Knight of Light appeared, holding an aura of light, and blasted the monster. In the end, the monster fled, and the Knight of Light disappeared. Colin says that was amazing and wonders when he'll get a title like that. Eren thinks, of course, they talk about that night of light. He wonders what happened to his departure form. His brother tells him it was approved and that using the family name worked. Eren says they should get out of there quickly without wasting time because if something happens, they won't be able to leave. They should get ready and meet in the lobby. Lon asks if something happened because he looks exhausted, but Colin tells him not to ask. As the day goes on, the magic tower releases them. Wellington laughs, saying that seeing his sons made him happy. He mentions that little rascal Leon got bigger, says he's back, and Colin does the same. Wellington replies that it's great. He heard something very serious happened in the Empire. Leon confirms and asks if his father wants an explanation. Wellington says it was surely something fun, but they must be tired, so it's better to rest. They'll talk during dinner. In his room, Eren says it's been a while since she's seen the young master. He was gone for a short time but received 2 new titles and got stronger. Yoren asks what she's talking about. Eren says that in the Aussie territory, he earned the title of Steel Mage. And in the royal capital, he earned the title of Rookie Killer. She asks if he didn't know because at the Knights Academy, he beat up 4 masterclass students. The protagonist admits that he did. Eren explains they were all rising talents, is why they were called rookies. And since he defeated them, they were now calling him a killer. The protagonist asks if they were all rookies. But anyway, he has gifts for him and cried, so he'll sort that out tomorrow. Just then, Peru approaches. He wants to know why he's still there. The Marquis has summoned him and his brothers for dinner. Wellington asks if everyone is well rested, and his sons confirm. He then says he'll explain why he called them before the food arrives. He's going to begin the test to determine the true heir. As you know, in House Rocks, the title passes to the eldest son, which would normally be Yurin. I inherited the title when I was younger than you are now, but he wasted many precious years. So I considered Colin as the next in line. However, Yurin has had a wake-up call, so I will not be the one to decide this. You will show with your own hands who deserves to become the heir. Colin and Leon look apprehensive. Euron asks how he will determine who is worthy. His father explains this has never been done before, and he plans to conduct it in several stages, starting with territorial defense. As you know, monsters are closing in on the capital. If they aren't exterminated quickly, the people will suffer. In other words, the first stage is to defend the territory. You will be placed in 3 different battle zones to display your skills. To evaluate you, I will send 3 stewards to observe and record your performance. For this stage, you must use everything at your disposal. Your own strength, your allies, connections, wealth, and everything else. Colin asks if that will really be allowed. Wellington replies that they are not trying to become knights but marquises. Strength is important, but for a marquis, many other things are more important. If you have the means, you can even borrow knights from elsewhere. Just do your best. Euron understands, as does Colin. Wellington says that now they should eat. Since his 2nd and 3rd sons have returned home after so long, he's had the family's classic chirene soup prepared. The protagonist stares blankly. Wellington tells them to eat well as they will be assigned to their zones in 1 month and must prepare everything they have. The next day, Euron wonders if there's anything he even needs to prepare. Peru reports that the other young masters are already making moves, especially Colin since the Livington family is even sending support. The protagonist thinks that Madame Kana has placed all her hopes in him. He then says the Marquis told them to get the best result. That means whether we take a squad of knights or kill the monsters ourselves, what matters is killing as many as possible. Peru says that's true, and the protagonist comments that they are on their way. The friends who will help carry out a true extermination, he welcomes them, saying he has something for both of them. First, for there's an old tradition of a lord giving a sword to his knight, so this one is for you. Clyde is impressed and thanks the young master, but he notices the power of the sword and wonders if it's on fire. However, it's not hot and he asks what it is. The protagonist says it's the fire of flame spirits. He asks what he thinks of the weight and Clyde says it's excellent, very light. The protagonist thinks that the sword has accepted him as its master. He tells him to talk to the sword as it will increase its power. Eren is surprised by this, and the protagonist calls to her. He tells her not to be jealous because her gift is right there. The girl looks at the sword and thanks him, but a strong gust of wind begins to emanate from it. The protagonist confirms it's a wind spirit sword, and Eren says she likes it. She apologizes, saying she's going to draw it now and asks for permission. Yuron tells her to go ahead and tells Cry to do the same, but they both flatter him, saying they'll win next time. The protagonist says, "Those little rascals." Peru comments that he's jealous of the spirit swords. The protagonist says he'll get him something good another time, but first, he needs to pay off a debt. He goes to another room, and Peru is astonished by the amount of coins. Yuron says he's going to pay him back many times over, and the butler is completely surprised. He says it's tens of times more, and now he understands. He wasn't just a genius of dark magic, but also of gambling. Yuron tries to deny it, but he tells him he needs to buy poisons with this money. Elsewhere, he calls for Gyronox. He asks how he is and if he likes the new forge. Gyronox says yes, and thanks to him, everyone has been treating him very well. The protagonist says he found masters for the swords he bought. Gyronox asks if he means the great sword and the rapier. Yuron replies that they have accepted their wielders and that he will show him later. Gyronox says that's a relief as he thought they were failures. The protagonist says that would be difficult since they are masterpieces and incredible weapons. Gyronox thanks him for trusting someone as incapable as himself. He's been thinking a lot and needs to tell the young master something. Yuron asks what it is, and the blacksmith explains that there's a serious problem within the Marquis. In his father's office, Wellington asks what he's talking about and wants to know what happened while Yuron begs for authorization. His father replies that he needs to know the reason as authorizations aren't given out so easily. The protagonist addresses his father, saying that ever since he collapsed because of Ilya and finally came to his senses, he hasn't disappointed the Marquis once. So please trust me and give me the authorization. I won't let you down. Wellington says all right, and that he'll tell the butler to get it tomorrow, but it will only be valid for 24 hours. Yuron thanks him. He says he'll be leaving now, and Wellington agrees. As his son leaves, he thinks he's an idiot because his heart softened when he was called father. He wonders if his son can really cause any trouble in just 24 hours. The next day, Peru reports that men carrying boxes are looking for him at the entrance, saying the Marquis sent them. Yuron says they've arrived right on time and tells all the male servants to go to the entrance and get everything. He needs to get something else, so he'll go ahead to the armory. A butler hands him the Marquis' authorization, and Yuron accepts it, but he wants to know what the Marquis is doing at that moment. The butler replies that the Marchioness has arrived, so they are having tea in the drawing room. Yuron orders the butler to tell the Marquis to bring Inspector and come to Armory number 1 this afternoon. If you don't deliver the message correctly, you will regret it. In front of the armory, some guards stop the protagonist, telling him that unauthorized personnel cannot enter. Yuron asks if he sees the boxes behind him. The guard nods, and the protagonist explains they are swords, shields, and armor he acquired from the Ass territory to prepare himself. So he needs to store them, and they must open up immediately. But the guard insists that the armory manager needs to be present. Yuron says that, in that case, he must have already been summoned. If anything happens at the armory, he's the first one who needs to know. He then points out the person running towards them is the manager. He asks what the protagonist thinks he's doing. Says he brought weapons and armor for the expedition and that they must open the doors. The manager apologizes but says the armory requires authorization. So the protagonist shows him the paper, telling him to open the door. The manager agrees but says he can only put things inside and must not touch anything. The subordinates begin moving the boxes. Yuron suggests inspecting some of the weapons and orders one of the boxes to be brought over. The manager says that requires a special authorization as well. The protagonist replies that he just wants to see one. The manager says he'll hand it to him then. He places the box down and says all that's left is to open it. Yuron asks about the condition of the weapons. Gyronox replies that most of the weapons in the box are decent. The protagonist comments that the armory manager has done an excellent job and that he should tell the Marquis to reward him, but they must bring all the other boxes and not leave a single one behind. The manager gets scared and yells that he's abusing his authority and that even if he is the heir, he can't do this. Yuron slaps him in the face with the authorization paper, telling him not to make him laugh, and he asks why he's playing dumb. Wellington arrives and calls out to his son. He wants to know what all the noise is about. Yuron says he emptied the armory and that he should see for himself. Wellington approaches a box and picks up a sword. He asks if he calls this a weapon as it's completely worn out. Then he orders the inspector to explain himself because a month ago during the inspection, he said there were no problems in the armory. The inspector says he must have hidden it somehow and is sure of it. But Yurin calls it nonsense as there's no way he could have damaged all the weapons in just 1 month. That's impossible unless someone allowed it to happen. The inspector can't breathe from the pressure. He then kneels, admitting he was wrong and begging for his life to be spared. Wellington calls out to his son and Yurin explains that this was why he needed authorization and couldn't tell him sooner. It wasn't just there. All the other arsenals and even the food depot were in the same state. Even if they somehow managed to complete this year's expedition, they wouldn't be able to in a few years. They might wield good weapons and eat well even during wartime, but he wants to know about his soldiers. If their superiors don't do their jobs, they will be forced to carry damaged weapons and eat food that is practically poisoned. Yurin would never forgive those who play with people's lives. In this box are swords, armor, and shields that his blacksmith bought from the Ass territory, and the quality is impeccable. He must discard anything that isn't usable and use these instead. Furthermore, this matter involves more people than they expect, and he asks that everyone connected to the two be punished. Wellington asks what this is all about. Yurin announces that he is leaving. He thinks that this is as far as he can intervene, and anything beyond this is outside his authority. Now the rest is up to the Marquis. A few days later, Wellington says his son has arrived, and Yurin questions if he was summoned. The Marquis explains that he managed to uncover the full extent of the damage thanks to him, and thought it was right to say the matter was now closed. Yurin replies that he understands. His father says he was right, as it had happened in all the other arsenals and food depots, and the number of people involved was enormous. What shocked him most were the arsenal manager and the inspector. They were people who had served for decades, and it broke his heart. Yurin tells him that he found every single one of them. The Marquis replies that they confessed everything with unbelievable honesty, even providing information he hadn't asked for. The protagonist then thinks that it must be the effect of his new poison, the truth serum. Wellington says he realized a lot of things thanks to this incident. Shortly after he became Marquis, the former king scolded him in front of many nobles, leaving him terribly embarrassed. But the words his son spoke that day hurt much more and were even more humiliating. He spoke the truth and even prepared countermeasures. He was the one who was a disappointment as a father. He asks his son for forgiveness because he is so sorry for being such a shameful father. Yurin stares at him for a few seconds but says he isn't. He spent years causing trouble before becoming a decent person, and humans make mistakes. His father sighs in annoyance, saying his son has a big mouth. In his room, Peru announces that his poison has arrived, a neurotoxin. The protagonist thinks that he prepared this because aquatic monsters have difficulty breathing on land and says he did a great job. Peru asks if the young master has heard the recent news. He explains that his popularity has greatly increased outside the empire. Yurin questions this, saying it surely didn't happen. Peru says that while he was traveling in search of poison, he heard it everywhere. They were moved that he was worried about the soldiers and touched that he had brought armor and shields with his own money. Yurin says his reputation as a delinquent wouldn't disappear so easily. Peru continues that some people were even trying to volunteer for the expedition, and as expected, he is a genius. He wonders if Yurin planned this, as they won't have any trouble recruiting troops now. The protagonist waves his hand, dismissing his subordinate. Peru says he is leaving and closes the bedroom door. Yurin says that his reputation improving was something he never would have expected. He wonders about developing a new poison. He starts mixing various concoctions and gains the immunity of 100 poisons, which removes all pain and symptoms of poison. The protagonist thinks that the process of absorbing and accepting the poison no longer hurts and even feels comfortable. The immunity of 100 poisons was incredible. The next day, the system appears. It announces that a new poison has been created. Hagen, the Serpent Slayer. A single drop can take a human life without a trace. The protagonist comments that he wanted to unlock a poison before Hagen, but it seems it was created anyway. He wonders if the divine poison energizing technique has reached the intermediate rank, and the more his energy increases, the stronger the poisons become. Peru calls for his young master in the morning. Yurin says he arrived at the perfect time and should come over for a second because he needs to prepare these poisons as quickly as possible. Peru notes that the list is quite long this time. Yurin confirms, thinking that he has plenty of money and absorbing poisons is now easier than drinking water. He'll use this to reach the 5th star, but the protagonist fails. And so the day of the departure ceremony arrives. All the soldiers gather in front of each of the heirs. Peru calls out to his young master. He wants to know if he'll be all right, and Yurin is surprised. The butler says that the other young master squads are enormous, while he only has Aaron and Cried and wants to know why he didn't accept any volunteers. Euron says he has a plan, while his younger brothers laugh. He asks why those idiots are laughing, saying he'll teach them a lesson. Then they announce that the Marquis has arrived. Wellington tells everyone to rise and asks if they are all there. He says he will be brief. He will be at the forefront where the danger is greatest, and wherever they go, he will go with them. They must fight and defend their land. Euron thinks that the expedition has begun, and so each of the three was sent to a battle zone. And 2 days after their departure, they arrived at the designated area. The protagonist orders the gates to be opened and introduces himself. Hans, the commander of the wall, says the young master has arrived. He sees his battalion and comments that they are short on people. Asks what he means, not understanding. Hans explains that at this time of year, hundreds of Volaks appear and attack, and with this number of troops, it will be impossible to handle them all. So he wants to know if more troops are on their way. In a few days, the entire coast will be covered with sea monsters like Volaks. If these creatures get through the waterways, the walls and gates could be destroyed, so they need to go out and eliminate the monsters. Hans shouts that with only 5 knights, it's impossible to stop them. Euron replies that there aren't 5. That knight is a butler from the Marquisate who came to monitor him, and the other is his personal butler. These are the only knights he has. And the important thing is that Cried will fight alone, so there's no need to worry. The knight questions what he means by that and how he could possibly do it. Euron tells him to trust him because he has a latent power. This power will be released this time. He thinks that it's time to awaken the berserker trait. The protagonist asks Hans for 2 training swords. He announces that from now until the monsters appear, Cried and Aren will duel during work hours. They should do this for an hour and then rest. And before the duel begins, he wants to talk to Aren. He asks her how her duels with Cried went under normal circumstances. Aren replies that, to be honest, she won without any difficulty. Euron asks if she was fighting without using her full strength. The girl replies it was because there was no need to go all out. The protagonist then says that from this duel onward, she must destroy him with everything she has, crush him so he can feel the painful difference in skill, and beat him senseless if she wants. This is all to make Cried release his latent potential, and she must trust him. Cried asks Senior Aren to please get ready. He then charges forward while the protagonist wonders when he got so good at manipulating aura. In a swift lunge, Cried attempts a horizontal slash. Aren draws her sword and ceases her aura manipulation. She then moves quickly behind him and makes a clean cut. Cried admits that he has lost. Euron is surprised and says he got chills. Her skill is truly strong. And now that he thinks about it, her clear mind has leveled up. Not only did she possess incredible speed, but she was also able to read the path of the sword and respond. Whether it was the 2nd, 3rd, or 9th duel, Aren always crushed him without any mercy. Peru comments that he couldn't even handle a single blow. This must have been a huge shock for Cried. On the ground, he says it's impossible for the gap to be so large. Euron announces that they should stop there for today. Cried asks if it's really possible for him. During all their duels, he couldn't even touch her clothes, yet he still has a latent power. Euron says that's right and turns away. Wondering if a power would appear so easily, he tells Cried that for now, he just has to trust him. He should continue dueling her. Sometime later, Aren beat Cried every single day. Euron is meditating in his room when Hans shouts that something terrible has happened. The protagonist asks what's wrong, and the commander says that finally Volaks were reaching the border. He tells him to look right there, at the sea. Those things were coming from there. They were several piranhas with legs. Euron says it's been a while since he's seen them and that Volaks are cute. He asks where Cried is. Aren explains that after losing earlier, he was still on the beach like that. The protagonist says that's excellent and that they should send him a message. On the beach, Cried screams that there's no hope. Aren calls out to him mentioning that his sword is heavy, but the young master told her to give it to him. The Volaks were coming, and he was to fight them. Cried turns around asking what she said. Aren repeats that he sent a message telling him to entrust his body to the smoke. After delivering this, he said to leave him there and come back. If it gets dangerous, he himself would help. Cried remarks that she's too cruel, wondering how this could even be possible. Hans says they should still call for reinforcements, and Peru wants to know how they'll handle everything. Eren says now is the time. Hello, everyone. Did you like the story? I loved it. If you want to follow the next part, make sure to subscribe to the channel and leave a like. See you in the next story, guys.